Chapter 193. 3 days later, at the Social Security Bureau. In fact, Weisher didn't know where the hell this place was because he was wearing a mask all the way in. When he opened his eyes, he was sitting in an empty room. Above his head was a pale white lamp. In front of him was a table. Under the white light, the person sitting behind the table was expressionless. Did I do something again? Weisher sluggishly looked around. Without waiting for Imo-san to speak, he skillfully reported, Weisher, male, 17 years old, student. Imo-san stared at him dumbfoundedly, then turned to look at his colleague beside him, not knowing what he was doing. Aren't you interrogating me? Weisher was overjoyed. So, I didn't do anything. Humph, like an idiot. The youth in the corner, Yuan Zhao, crossed his arms. His expression was disdainful, as if he wanted to find fault. Imo-san slapped the back of his head. What are you doing here? Get out, get out. Yuan Zhao had an innocent expression. Big cousin told me to come. Call him bureau chief. Big cousin is not something you can call. Imo-san raised his hand and slapped again. This time, Yuan Zhao pulled back his head and dodged. So, can someone explain to me what's going on? Weisher raised his hand and asked. Imo-san's expression became complicated. After looking at him for a long time and confirming that he really didn't know, he said, This is the Jinling Social Security Bureau's prison department. Due to various reasons and confidentiality, we can't let you know the specific location and how to get in. And I can see that. Weisher looked around at the dark walls and nodded. And then, there's no and then. Imo-san spread out his hands. To be honest, I just came to drink a cup of tea with you. You can relax a bit. After all, you are now a member of the Astronomy Society. You didn't violate the 12 copper tables and border regulations, so we won't do anything to you. Moreover, the person who brought you here wasn't me. Speaking of this, Weisher became angry. That muscular old bastard suddenly jumped out of the car and grabbed him. He didn't even have time to react to what was going on. Then, the sound of heavy footsteps came from outside the door. All right, I've already made arrangements with them. It was rare for the old man to wear a jacket. He swaggered in from the outside and pulled a stool to sit down, as if it was his own home. He said to Weisher, Take a break and get ready to go on stage later. What the hell? Weisher was dumbfounded. What have you arranged for me this time? He was afraid of this old man. For the past few days, he had been thinking of ways to torture himself. Fitness training was a piece of cake for him. Later on, he repeatedly sent Weisher flying with the drummer to let him experience the changes in strength. He also tied up Weisher's hands and held the Gatling gun behind him, forcing him to run for his life and practice the U-steps. He did all these perverted things, making Weisher want to pay more money. However, Weisher gritted his teeth and persevered when he remembered that he couldn't lower his head to the forces that were trying to scam him. Who would have thought that this old bastard would go overboard and throw him into jail? Actual combat training. The old man took a break and held a gripper. He casually explained, Training every day is not very useful. After learning enough, it's time to practice actual combat. Otherwise, after 3 years of fighting, you won't be beaten until you can't tell which way is north. Weisher was so angry that he flipped the table. What the hell do you mean by putting actual combat in jail? Of course, it's the kind that won't stop until you're dead. Elder Luo asked with a serious face. Otherwise, what kind of actual combat is it? Weisher was stunned for a long time before he reacted. He stuttered for a long time before asking, What you're doing is illegal, right? Ha ha, what you said is really interesting. Elder Luo snorted. Next time you say something like this, please take yourself out and shoot yourself. Many people have died in your hands. I remember that you weren't so sissy when you were killing an arson. What was that person's name again? Chiwon? This is different from that. They're more or less the same. Elder Luo slapped a thick stack of things on the table. This is your opponent today, a disciple of the Soul Eater cult who should have been executed. When he was caught, he was sitting at the dining table of the family of 3. The soup in the pot was still hot. Guess what he cooked? Huaishur did not say anything. He lowered his head and looked at the trial book on the table. After a long time, he shook his head. I didn't come here to train for this. Then what did you come here for? To work out? Elder Luo asked back. You learned how to kill people, but you didn't kill them. Then why? At least, I didn't learn this kind of thing to kill people. Huaishur raised his eyes and looked at him. His expression became resolute. I'm not standing here for this either. Then what is it for? I don't know. Huaishur shook his head crisply, causing the old man to frown. If you don't understand what you've chosen, then obediently go home and drink your happy water. Little brat, the world of the Ascended isn't so gentle. Huaishur's expression was calm. He only looked at him and asked back, You can't take it for granted that you'll become bad just because this world isn't good, right? Naive. Elder Luo said coldly. A long time ago, someone asked me why I became an Ascended. She told me that no matter what I choose, in the end, it's like a chain of idioms. I'll start doing whatever I want, whatever I want, whatever I want. Huaishur muttered to himself for a long time and said, Seriously, I've always thought about what she meant by that sentence. Only now do I vaguely understand. Sometimes the important thing isn't doing whatever you want, but what you can't do. In the silence, the youth raised his eyes and looked at him. Maybe I chose to become strong, so I can do whatever I want, but the premise shouldn't be that I have more choices. It shouldn't be that I can't find a way to solve a problem other than killing people, right? In the corner, Yuan Zhao glanced at him and opened his mouth to speak. Then he was slapped on the back of his head by Mo-san. Children shouldn't interrupt when adults are talking. After saying this, the cold and elegant big sister pinched his ear and dragged him out. In the silence, Elder Luo silently looked at Huaishur. He seemed unhappy, but he also seemed to have finally caught a glimpse of something behind that calm face and gradually came to a realization. Huaishur, it's really irritating to see that childish face of yours that's so serious and bragging. Although he said this, he finally stopped calling the youth in front of him a little rascal. He gradually retracted his previous contempt, and his expression became calm. Then, are you going to refuse this competition? You're even going to admit defeat before going on stage. No, I'll win. Huaishur calmly looked at him. Since this is a lesson, I'll complete it. If this is a question you set, then I'll solve it. But no matter what kind of plan or education you have, no matter what you want me to become, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for me to satisfy your wishes. It really sounds like something a bad student would say. Elder Luo cheerfully smiled. As an educator, I'm already looking forward to the day when you turn over a new leaf. There won't be such a day. Huaishur stood up, picked up the verdict on the table, and walked towards the door. Just as Huaishur was about to leave, he was stopped by the old man. The old man, with his back facing him, suddenly asked, Hey, do you know the consequences of being merciful to your enemy? Don't worry. Huaishur waved his hand at the old man. I don't have much of that kind of thing left. The door closed. Under the silent light, the silent old man silently smiled. Under the pressure of countless muscles, this expectant smile became especially sinister. For the first time in his life, he actually ignited a trace of the passion of an educator. This kind of nonsense. As expected, if a student is too obedient, then there's no meaning, right? In the darkness, there seemed to be countless whispers. In the deep darkness that even light couldn't penetrate, a hunched and thin figure, was shackled. His eyes were drooping as if he was immersed in a dream. However, the darkness was dancing. It was countless thin and almost indistinguishable fog. Along with the whispers, it spread in all directions. However, immediately after, it retreated under the electric light and was imprisoned in the cage. In the long silence, the passage of time didn't matter until the sound of heavy footsteps slowly walked over. The window of the cage was pulled open, revealing a pair of iron-gray vertical pupils. "Walker Carroll." The guard named Chun Qingyang coldly said. "The time has come." Finally, the prisoner named Walker slowly raised his head. It was a face that was so thin that it was almost skeletal. There was also a pair of frighteningly large pitch-black eyes. He grinned. "To be honest, I thought you would directly execute me." "I will," Chun Qingyang calmly said. "Even if you can win, you'll just be struggling at death's door for a while. There's no need to be so happy. Survival, sir. Survival is the most enjoyable thing." Walker narrowed his eyes and took a deep breath. The countless inverted dreams and the countless fragmented dreams are intoxicating at every moment. To be honest, I really love this place. It's rare for someone to like it. Please remember to give us a good review after you die. Chun Qingyang stretched out his hand and pulled open the door of the cage. An invisible force unlocked Walker's shackles, causing the countless darkness imprisoned in his body to gush out. As he closed his eyes, in the blink of an eye, countless large and small eyes opened in the darkness. Some were mocking, some were angry, some were happy, some were confused. Countless eyes flowed. And finally, they looked at Chun Qingyang. "Where's my opponent?" Chun Qingyang said. "Just behind you." Boom. At that moment, the four walls of the cage slowly opened amidst a loud noise. Incandescent cold light shone down from the dome, illuminating countless huge hubs. It was as if the steel jungle was rapidly changing. The walls, the floor, everything was rapidly shifting, appearing, and retracting. In the end, it turned into a huge plaza. As Walker Carroll turned around, the youth's figure slowly rose from behind the open door. Ah, such an intoxicating origin substance. Around Walker, in the darkness, countless huge eyes started to tremble in excitement, as if they had smelled some delicacy. The level 3 stigmata nightmare had awakened. Chapter 194. Since this is actual combat training, we naturally have to be strict and verify what we've learned. Before going on stage, the muscular old man glanced at him. "You're aware of the sacred mark, but you're not allowed to use any weapons created by your soul ability. Can you do that?" "Barehanded?" "Yes, barehanded," Elder Luo coldly said. "The more people you kill with your half-baked weapon techniques, the more you'll walk down the wrong path. To deal with that kind of trash, a beginner's drummer, and you step is enough." "That's easy for you to say. After all, he's at the 3rd rank." Huaisher took off his jacket and threw it on the chair. He stepped into the elevator and said, "I'll try my best." "Try your best." Ha! As the chair rose, the old man appeared on the highest level of the audience. Through the glass, he looked down at the 2 people walking out of the arena. "This isn't a game, kid." He laughed in schadenfreude and was full of expectations. This was an opponent that he had carefully selected. Whether it was the sacred mark or the style of battle, Huaisher was completely subdued. If he went against the enemy with an irreverent attitude, he would die. When Huaishir rose along with the platform, he saw a dancing darkness outside the opened door. Among the countless malevolent eyes, there was a middle-aged man standing there with his eyes closed. "It's actually a young man." Walker Carroll sighed softly and grinned. "Why don't you cherish the short life you have? Young man, wasting your precious life on gambling in this kind of place is really unwise. Although I feel that there's no reason for someone whose judgment is several inches thick to say such words, I have to say that you're quite right." Huaishir slowly walked forward. Bare-handed, he stared at the opponent in front of him. Without a doubt, he was at the third rank. Even in a weakened state, he still emitted origin substance fluctuations that made people shudder. At his peak, he could probably reach the fourth rank, star antimony, at any time. At that time, the difference would be like heaven and earth. No matter how hard Huaishir tried, he would not be able to defeat him. But even now, he still gave Huaishir a sense of danger. The premonition of death had been screaming crazily from the beginning, reminding him of the threat of the enemy in front of him. It is precisely because life is precious that death has value, isn't it? Surrounded by countless pairs of eyes, Walker, who had his eyes closed, chuckled softly. Like the flowers in spring, like the withered leaves in autumn. This is the beauty of life. It must be seriously appreciated. Yes, I can see that. Huaishir lowered his eyes, refusing to look at the boiling emotions swirling within his origin substance. It was a cruel scene, like a cauldron of darkness, a hell created from the despair and pain of countless people. 471 people. Walker suddenly said, a total of 471. Huaishir didn't say anything. He just moved his body like an athlete preparing to warm up before going on the field. He stretched his joints and relaxed his muscles as if he didn't hear his voice. However, Walker began to ramble on and on. Every single one of them is an exquisite work of art. Every single one of them carried with them an indescribable sense of grandeur when they died. Young man, you must be able to experience the scene of origin substance rising as their consciousnesses shattered. A person's entire life, everything that they pursue turns into a bubble that slowly rises like smoke and disappears as soon as they turn around. The so-called life is such a fragile thing. All that remains is the scene that you see right now. If it makes you feel disgusted, I express my regret, but I won't regret it. No, you should be able to experience this kind of beauty just like me, right? Huaishir raised his head and glanced at him. His face was expressionless. In the darkness, he cracked open his mouth and laughed softly. That kind of calm and distant gaze. Ah, I really miss it. A person like you should be at the border. No, you were born to be chosen by the world outside the border. Purely in terms of quality, your soul is the first I have seen in my life. No matter how hard I try, I can't reach such a level of purity. It really makes people jealous. Are you done? Huaishir bent down and got into a sprinting posture. Then let's get down to business, shall we? I'm just trying to make you understand. Walker smiled and shrugged. To be able to meet such a beautiful soul like you in this prison, I'm so... In the next moment, darkness erupted. Countless eyes collided with each other and blended together. In the end, thousands of eyeballs overlapped and formed a strange deformed eye. A gray light shot towards Huaishir. It was as if it came from a demon's eyes. It carried indescribable madness, chaos, and gratitude. At that moment, Huaishir had already disappeared from where he stood. Following a loud sound, the sports shoes on his feet shattered. Under the torn trousers, muscles surged like water waves, transmitting pure and exquisite power to his feet. Then he soared into the air. Currently, he was still unable to freely change directions at will. Under the pressure of the muscular old man, he could only concentrate on studying long-distance acceleration. After breaking a few of his legs in the records, he had barely reached the beginner level. In the blink of an eye, he covered 10 meters with one step. Each step was worthy of the name of extreme speed, and Huaishur had already descended from the sky. His palm pressed down on Walker's face and suddenly tightened. On his arm, the sound of muscles vibrating was like the sound of zither strings bursting forth with a sharp sound. Drummer has already reached the beginner level so fast. The eldest cousin, who was watching, sighed in astonishment. I still haven't reached the beginner level. It's still early. Elder Luo's eyelids drooped. He was already bored to the point of sleepiness. In terms of appearance, only when the sound is like thunder, all the basic potential has been dug out. Now, it's just the appearance. You can't even be called a drummer, but you're still more talented than me. Everyone is more talented than you, Elder Luo said mercilessly. In all these years, I've never seen someone more useless than you. Isn't it a good thing that he's not good at killing people? The eldest cousin spread out his hands indifferently and looked at the field. But he's going to be in danger. Boom. As Huaishur's 5 fingers tightened, a loud sound burst forth. But Walker's smiling face in his hand had disappeared without a trace. He had clearly caught it. Are you looking for me? At that moment, a hoarse whisper came from behind her. A hand gently rested on Huaishur's shoulder. In an instant, a bone-chilling cold pierced through her body as countless amounts of vitality transformed into illusory heat that was extracted by that hand. Huaishur instantly turned around and raised his leg. But in the darkness of nothingness, he kicked empty air. Like a ghost, Walker maintained a distance of a few feet. He smiled and praised, "You're so fast." Huaishur didn't reply. He silently moved forward and attacked. But in an instant, he lost sight of his enemy. A hoarse whisper sounded in his ears. "Unfortunately, I'm faster than you." When Huaishur turned around, he only saw a magnified palm in front of him. It pinched his face and suddenly lifted him up. Then it pushed him to the ground. Boom. Huaishur's vision turned black. But with the instinct that he had been trampled on by Elder Luo these days, he stretched out his hand and slashed toward Walker's neck. His hand blade broke through the air and caused a shrill sound, but it was dodged. Walker retreated like an invisible smoke. And Huaishur's body parts that were hit, such as his face and shoulders, no longer had any feeling. No, if it was an ordinary person, they would probably have been sucked dry by the nightmare in an instant. Now that Huaishur had only lost his senses, it was fortunate in the midst of misfortune. The vitality of the mountain ghost flowed rapidly. It was as if sweet dew was sprinkled down after a great drought. The withered flesh quickly recovered to its original state. The deep-rooted vitality wasn't erased, reinvigorated. Huaishur panted violently. His back was drenched in sweat. He stared at Walker, who was slowly drifting not far away. He finally understood the nature of his opponent's soul ability. Just like him, it was a type of transformation. However, it was limited to its own body. Now, it seemed that Walker had already achieved a high degree of fusion with the sacred mark and was in the midst of a transformation. In short, it was like a dream or an illusion. Currently, he was still unable to interfere with the external physical environment and pry open the rules left behind by the creators. However, it was still enough to cover his own body and transform his body between material and illusory at will. This was originally the type of enemy that Huaishur was most proficient in dealing with. The Axe of Wrath was most proficient in both origin substances and physical attacks, no matter what state an object was in. As long as it had the properties of material and origin substances, it wouldn't be able to withstand a single blow from the axe. But now that he was restricted by Instructor Luo's rules, he couldn't use the simplest method. He had to use the techniques that he had learned recently to defeat his enemy. But his enemy was the type that restrained him the most. Huaishir was most proficient in fast-paced attacks. After gaining the upper hand, he would rely on his explosive output to defeat his enemy. However, if his opponent's speed was above his own, he would be at a disadvantage. When a speed-type sublimator encountered a speed-type sublimator, if they used the old method, they wouldn't be able to gain an advantage no matter what. Is that what you're trying to say? Huaishir turned around and looked at the room hanging high above him. The old man behind the floor-to-ceiling glass thought to himself, "Abandon your old ideas, face your own loopholes, and use a new angle to solve the problem." When the muscular old man saw Huaishir's gaze, he picked up a black and hard stick and began to show off his chest and arms. Huaishir's expression twitched. He felt that there must be something wrong with him if he expected this muscular old man to be so considerate. But no matter what, he had to win. Since he couldn't ask the miraculous conch, he would have to use his invincible mouth to think of a way. "Look at you, you're still a virgin." In the midst of the tense confrontation, Huaishir suddenly opened his mouth and asked solemnly, "You definitely don't have a girlfriend, right?" Walker's expression stiffened for a moment. Opportunity. In the blink of an eye, Huaishir stepped forward and once again charged forward. After he broke through the 13-meter barrier, the muscles on his arms suddenly swelled up, swelling to a purplish-red color as he blasted towards Walker's sluggish face. It was still the drummer. Chapter 195. He succeeded in an instant. It was as if he had stirred up a cloud of fog. The place where his hand landed was empty, but Huaishir did not slow down at all. He activated his force. Boom! The darkness was like a fog. Walker screamed as he retreated. He finally received the price of this delay. When he raised his twitching face again, half of it had already shattered. His entire left cheekbone had sunk in deeply, and his left eye had already exploded. He did not have time to turn his head into an illusion. His drumming had taken more than half of the damage. Unfortunately, Huaishir felt a sense of loss. If his drumming skills had improved, and he did not release it so roughly, this attack could have the effect of the Fist of the North Star and make Walker explode on the spot. But it was too late to feel regret. Walker's counterattack came. In the darkness, the strange, squirming eyeball suddenly opened and looked in his direction. A gray light shot out. Before that, Huaishir had already noticed his action of opening his eye. He took a step to the left from where he stood, brushing past the gray light and closing in. In the darkness, the deformed organ formed by countless overlapping eyes angrily chased over. But it could not catch Huaishir's steps. The speed of sight was based on the speed of light. It should have been faster than Huaishir's movements. But these days, Huaishir had already trained his dodging skills under the muscular old man's Gatling gun. Even if he could only maintain the state-of-use steps in long-distance acceleration, he could still turn crazily and dodge in Walker's blind spot. Ah! Walker roared angrily. The strange eye suddenly collapsed and returned to its original number of hundreds and thousands. It looked around in a disorderly manner. He instantly laughed. "Caught you!" Being suddenly stared at by three eyes under the dim gray light, Huaishir suddenly felt dizzy and sluggish. He could not help but feel sleepy. Eustace paused. But then he felt the wind behind his ear. He subconsciously fell down and felt Walker's elbow whistling past. Huaishir rolled on the ground and felt the floor rumble beside his ears. It had already been trampled to pieces by the nightmare demon. More eyes turned to look at them. Huaishir's movements slowed down again. Walker lifted his foot and kicked out abruptly. No matter how fast he was, Huaishur had already been sent flying. Before he could land on the ground, he was caught up by the shadow in the dark. Walker lifted him up by the neck and smashed him onto the ground. In midair, Huaishur counterattacked, but all he could touch was smoke. The moment he landed, he adjusted his posture, propped himself up with his palms, and flipped backwards. But the moment he steadied himself, he felt a hand reach out from the darkness and cover his face. Walker laughed evilly. Behind him, countless eyes opened in the darkness and stared intently at Huaishur, extracting his origin substance and pushing him deeper and deeper into the abyss, robbing him of his reason and sending him into a dream. That was the true domain of the Nightmare Lord. Go to sleep, child. Under the gaze of countless eyes, Huaishur instantly lost consciousness. Walker laughed evilly, continuously pouring the negative origin substance from the darkness into his soul. Fall completely into the depths of a nightmare of despair. Next was the stage for the Nightmare Lord to display his skills. No matter who it was, after entering the dream, they could only be slaughtered. But in that instant, he saw Huaishur's closed eyes open once again. What did you say? Walker was stunned. Then he saw a fist rapidly grow larger in front of his eyes. Boom! He flew backwards, and his face, which he had painstakingly restored to its original appearance, shattered once again. But what was even more difficult for him to accept was that Huaishur hadn't entered the dream. No, he had indeed entered the dream. Only for an instant. After an instant, he awoke from the dream of despair that he had painstakingly created. He had broken free of the cage. Why wasn't he lost at all? I was probably awoken by my handsomeness. Huaishur smiled and stepped forward, instantly crossing the long distance. She stared straight at Walker, who was close at hand. She grinned, revealing a sinister smile that was similar to the one the muscular old man had. That appearance was like an evil spirit listening to the teachings of Buddha, and his smile became as solemn as the Wisdom King's. Then a punch. Boom. The smoke was turbulent. In front of the burning Huaishur, dark green flames rose from his body. Following the transformation of his body, the mountain ghost revealed his gloomy side. In the huge crack in his chest, countless flames surged. Then, a torrential wave of pain gushed out. It caused the dark dream to be turbulent and engulfed, as if it was about to be ignited by the dark green flames of pain. Without using any of the abilities of the mountain ghost's sacred mark, regardless of whether it was the halo of fear or the halo of plague, or even overclocking, Huaishur only moved forward, stirring up the darkness piled up by countless nightmares. In just a few days, this overly violent and ruthless cold life force had undergone a qualitative transformation. It was as if an axe had been sharpened. A terrifying sense of invasiveness shot out from the pair of eyes that were burning with will-o'-the-wisps. At that moment, Walker finally understood. It wasn't that his dream didn't have any miraculous effects. In fact, his dream had already accomplished its mission. In an instant, it had indeed brought despair, pain, and darkness into Huaishur's consciousness. However, the nightmares he created compared to Huaishur's nightmare were simply not worth mentioning. Ah, wonderful. Wonderful. He wasn't shocked, but rather happy, and laughed sharply. How is this a partner of justice? Young man, despair, fear, anger, and also a rare hesitation. What a dense negative origin substance. What a pure darkness and madness. He laughed happily, as if he had found his own kind. Young man, as expected, you and I are the same in our bones. Boom! The nightmare, which had turned into a dream, flew out as if it had been struck by lightning. In front of the young man's raised fist. Did you make a mistake? Huaishur tilted his head, looking down at his sluggish appearance. A tangible arrogance appeared in his burning eyes. Don't confuse me with trash like you. Trash. In the midst of his low voice, the young man took a step forward. He clenched his fist, and a thunderous sound rang out. In that instant, on the viewing platform, it wasn't just the dumbfounded eldest cousin. Even the indifferent elder Luo raised his eyebrows and straightened his body. He had actually broken through. That's right, in that instant, Huaisher's drumming skills had completely entered the door. Not only did it have a thunderous appearance, but it also had the effect of combining his true fighting skills and origin substance. He didn't rely on his own soul ability. Just by relying on his skin and the use of origin substance, he had broken through the gap between reality and illusion, truly touching upon the illusory dream. In other words, from now on, Walker's soul ability was completely useless to Huaisher. Before he had entered the door of drumming, that kind of laughable nightmare would only be torn apart like a thin piece of paper. In the darkness, under the countless astonished gazes of the audience, the burning youth walked forward step by step, stretching his arms and shoulders as he muttered to himself, "Despair? Pain? Darkness? Madness? Your mother's fart." Boom. In the blink of an eye, Huaisher had crossed a distance of 10 or so steps. He appeared in front of the nightmare and swung his fist. Under the cover of the dark green flames, countless muscles and tendons on his arm trembled. His strength and origin substance converged into a single line, bursting forth from his 5 fingers that had suddenly clenched into a fist, forming an origin substance explosion that was confined to his fist. The void drum. This was the true essence hidden in the name of drumming. Relying on his own origin substance, he shook the void, shook the air, and let out a thunderous roar. As he pushed forward with an unstoppable force, it seemed as if there was physical destruction. The darkness trembled violently. Countless nightmares and negative origin substances actually showed signs of collapsing under this attack. A crack appeared in the illusory dream created by the Nightmare Lord. Huaisher had already lifted Walker by the neck and stared into his eyes, pausing between each word as he asked, "Do you know how happy I am?" Walker stared at him blankly. His lips trembled, but he couldn't make a sound. "Wrong. My happiness is something you can't even imagine." Huaisher raised his fist and smashed it into the giant deformed eye that had once again converged in the darkness, causing 2 streams of blood to flow from Walker's eyes. The giant eye collapsed into countless small, frightened eyes. It was as if they had truly felt Huaisher's happiness. Sometimes, wasn't the worst kind of happiness to inflict one's own pain on one's enemy? Take another guess. Huaisher once again raised Walker and asked seriously, "What is it that emits green flames?" Walker was stunned. What was it that emitted green flames? Was it a Gatling gun? Wrong. Huaisher slowly shook his head and grinned. "It's me." In front of Walker, he slowly assumed the standard structure of a drummer. Under the crazy flow of the dark green flames, the muscles all over his body jumped crazily. In the end, it converged into a low rhythm. Light heating is fire. Fire speeding up the music is me. He sang as if there was no one else around. If I and fire add you, happiness should be more. In that instant, the drummer's thunder burst forth, but it glowed with the silver color of metal rubbing against each other. Da, 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 da. Amidst the loud sound of breaking through the air, the fist that was filled with countless ashes constantly burst forth with thunder. It whistled and overlapped with each other, turning into the happiest 10 combo for mobile players. It was as if there was a substance of happiness that descended upon the nightmare, causing it to collapse and wail. Under the crushing of the iron fist, those tiny eyes shattered one after another. The illusory nightmare of darkness shook violently and constantly dissipated. Under this destructive bombardment, it completely dissipated into the void. When the happy thunder came to an abrupt end, Walker, who no longer looked like a human, had already been sent flying. He landed on the ground and could no longer move. As for Huaisher, he stood in the same place, panting. Cracks began to appear on his arms. He was on the verge of collapsing under the 10 consecutive drummers that exceeded his limits. But now, under the vitality of the mountain ghost, the wounds were rapidly healing, and Huaisher was moving forward. Chapter 196. In the silence, only Walker's vague screams could be heard. He twisted crazily on the ground, trying to activate the source substance and create a dream to hide himself, but his soul that was on the verge of shattering no longer had any source substance. The burning youth smiled and stepped forward. Walker opened his mouth and screamed with all his might with his distorted face. Looking at the viewing platform, his expression was no longer confident and relaxed. All that was left was panic and pleading, but no one responded. In the silence, only the low footsteps of the youth who had turned into an evil spirit could be heard. There was also the sudden sound of cello melody. G-string. Huaisher was stunned. He turned around and looked at the viewing platform above his head. On the clothes rack next to the muscular old man, Huaisher's mobile phone rang. "Sorry, can you help me get it?" In the silence of everyone, only the big cousin enthusiastically helped him take out the phone, opened the window, and threw it over. "Thank you." Huaisher caught the phone and answered the call. "Hello, who is it?" On the phone was a rather mature and gentle female voice. "Is this Mr. Huaisher?" "Yes." Huaisher nodded. "What's the matter?" "Because we didn't get a reply from you. We have to notify you manually." The woman calmly said, "The ABRSM professional cello exam you applied for will be held at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please register 15 minutes in advance. Otherwise, it will be regarded as you giving up the exam." What? In an instant, Huaisher was stunned in place, as if he had fallen into an ice cave. The original crazy killing intent and ferociousness disappeared, replaced by hesitation and helplessness. "Mr. Huaisher, are you listening?" Huaisher trembled and stammered, Okay, I know. Is there an accident?" No. Huaisher raised his voice in panic. "Absolutely not. Other than being so busy that he forgot about the exam and didn't practice for the past few days, there was no accident at all. Damn, how could I forget about this? How could he forget?" Huaisher stomped his feet in regret and slapped himself on the forehead. "This is bad." "Then, I wish you good results." The woman on the phone politely said goodbye and hung up. In the dead silence, Huaisher maintained his stiff posture. After a long time, he finally came back to his senses. His original happiness had disappeared without a trace. Ever since half a month ago, he had stopped practicing the guqin. Since he started his advancement, he was definitely going to fail this exam. Huaisher listened to the busy tone on the phone and put down his hand in a daze. Then, he couldn't help but swear. It was as if he had fallen from happiness to despair in an instant. Huaisher suddenly realized that happiness belonged to others, and he had nothing so infuriating. Why waste time on this piece of trash? He angrily reached out and picked up the terrified nightmare. "The sweet dream is over, Mr. Walker." He raised his hand and condensed plague ash. Then he stuffed it into his nostrils and mouth. "Now, the time of the nightmare is over." When Huaisher put down his hand, his eyes finally opened. The remaining one eye was dull. There was no spirit. Only numb breathing and heartbeat were left. The excessive amount of negative origin substances had already completely swallowed up his shattered soul, and the nightmare demon was finally drowned out by endless despair. This was the end of this duel. Huaisher slowly let go of his hand and let the drooling retard fall to the ground. He looked back at the high platform behind him and took 2 steps back. You can deal with the rest yourselves. Behind the floor-to-ceiling glass, the old man nodded expressionlessly, but a trace of disappointment flashed in his eyes. Just a little more. If it wasn't for that phone call, I'm afraid he's not your opponent, Teacher Luo. Eldest cousin handed over an apple and grabbed a banana for himself, munching on it with relish. That child only received pain from death, not a single bit of happiness. In fact, he abhorred the idea of killing something. Such a person is destined to not be your successor, and it's impossible for him to complete that thing. Yes, the old man lowered his eyes. Life is not as you wish. Big cousin finished eating and threw away the banana peel. He rubbed his hands and said seriously, there's no need to be so anxious. We can actually think of another way. There's not enough time. Elder Luo slowly shook his head with a calm expression. Some things have to be done personally, right? Big cousin seemed to want to say something, but Huaisher had already rushed in with hurried footsteps. He picked up his coat and hurriedly waved to everyone. He shouted to the old man, I'll take the day off tomorrow. Take the day off. Elder Luo frowned. For what? Exams. Do you think you're the only teacher in the world? Huaisher answered matter-of-factly. Then he hurriedly put on his headgear, picked up Yuan Zhao, who looked the most idle in the corner, and rushed out of the door. Hey, what are you doing? Yuan Zhao struggled with all his might. There's no time to explain. Let's go and get the car. But I'm only 14 years old and don't have a driver's license. Just step on the gas pedal. Let's go. Bang. The sound of collision came from the end of the corridor. They hit the wall. The atmosphere instantly became awkward, but Big Cousin couldn't help but laugh out loud. His laughter was very unnatural. Look, Teacher Luo, young people's problems should be solved by them. Big Cousin turned back and looked at the silent old man. I think there's no need to be in such a hurry. Let's wait and see. The old man lowered his eyes. Let me wait and see. In the evening, Ai Qing saw Yu Dongri in the lounge of the Jinling branch. He was sitting on the chair, untouched by the coffee, in front of him as if he was waiting for someone. She shook her head and walked over with her walking stick. He's not here. I'll wait for you. Yu Dongri shook his head and smiled. He pointed to the seat in front of him and asked, Are you free? Ai Qing was stunned for a moment and looked at him deeply. After a long time, she slowly shook her head. It doesn't matter. It's dinner time. She sat opposite Yu Dongri and put the dinner box in her hand on the table. There was a vegetable salad and a few slices of meat. She picked up her fork. There's an overall planning meeting later. Do you mind if I talk while eating? Yu Dongri snapped his fingers and signaled the waiter to bring a cup of hot tea. Then he looked back at her. It's not good for your stomach to eat cold food all the time. Where did you learn to speak like an honest person? Ai Qing frowned. Is there something wrong with your brain? I'm sorry. I just saw my ex-girlfriend and my tone hasn't changed. Yu Dongri coughed awkwardly. Don't worry, I'm not borrowing money. I'm relieved to hear that. Ai Qing replied calmly. It was unknown whether she was being sarcastic or telling the truth. So, you're saying that there are more troublesome problems waiting for me? About Huaisher, Ai Qing understood. Problems related to him were generally troublesome. However, after Yu Dongri paused for a moment, he continued, and you? Thus, the problem became more and more troublesome. I'm not sure about the Yin family's attitude, she said bluntly, but Huaisher should be seen as a threat, right? Especially after he showed his ability as a legendary investigator. You should know how rare this title is. Yu Dongri nodded speechlessly. He already knew that this unlucky child could always surprise people in unexpected places. There were only 16 rare titles in the world. This was even rarer than a Fifth Order Ascendant. Even if the user base of the Dark Net was not high, an Ascendant who could kill his way out of the nightmare game and obtain the title of a legendary was not to be underestimated, especially when this Ascendant had a grudge against them. It was normal for the Een family to make a move. But now, they did not need to worry about this, especially after their cousin publicly expressed his admiration for Huaishur. Even if he did not seem to be arrogant and approachable, he was still the director of the Jinling Social Security Bureau. Every word and action of his could represent the attitude of Dongxia. Not to mention, his younger sister was the current second prince of Dongxia, the White Emperor's son. His father was the famous enemy of all worlds, Chu Hai. With such a character, even if he was an idiot, Jinling would tremble when he stomped his feet. And the most terrible thing was that he was not an idiot. When he deliberately reminded everyone that he did not want anything unpleasant to happen, the Een family naturally would not choose to let something happen that no one wanted to happen. If the Een family wanted to kill Huaishur, they would have let him die openly and without reproach. They wouldn't have done it behind his back and let him die without knowing the reason behind it. Yu Dongri was not worried about the storm on the surface. After all, the kid's life was very tough, so it was fine to go through a lot of trouble. Rather than Huaishur, I'm actually more worried about you. Yu Dongri looked at her deeply. The Een family has started to put pressure on you recently, right? Ai Qing did not say anything. She just lowered her head and ate her dinner. Even the frequency of her movements did not change. After a long time, she put down the meal box in her hand and took out a napkin to wipe her mouth. She raised her head and said, "This has nothing to do with you." "What about Huaishur?" Yu Dongri asked. Ai Qing frowned. A few days ago, an account checked the Een family's industrial structure and the detailed information of the main members. Yu Dongri frowned. "I got this information through my friend's channel. It might not be Huaishur." Yu Dongri did not say anything. He directly took out his phone and showed Ai Qing the profile picture of the account. She was stunned for a long time. After a long time, she sighed softly. "This picture is too stupid. Who took it for him? I also want to know." Yu Dongri said, "Even if you don't want to get him involved, he still wants to jump into this muddy water. Moreover, he should care about you." Ai Qing was expressionless. "It's not as exaggerated as you think. It's also not as simple as you think, right?" Yu Dongri looked at her. After a long time, he could not help but sigh. "To be honest, I didn't expect that your mother would be Huaishur's cello teacher. I should have thought of it a long time ago. The most famous cellist in Dongxia was Ai Ting, your mother." In the silence, Ai Qing's eyes changed. It was as if the cover hanging outside had been torn apart by an angry iron piece, revealing a chilling edge. "I don't know what you want to say, Yu Dongri, but I have to remind you of one thing." She stared into the eyes of the man in front of her and said word by word, "Don't mention her name, not even a word." Chapter 197. In the end, they parted on bad terms. The two of them seemed to have reached a consensus on something, but this consensus did not make them feel gratified or happy. Rather than a consensus, it would be more appropriate to call it a compromise. That night, Jinling's Xuanmu Lake Hotel once again welcomed a group of uninvited guests. Inside the presidential suite, champagne or whiskey? "Water, just plain water will do," the muscular man sitting on the sofa said. "Okay, plain water." The blond, middle-aged man shrugged helplessly. He looked at the 8 people standing behind the muscular man and the corner of his mouth twitched. Then he gathered all the glasses in the room and placed them in front of them. They were all plain water. "Professor, I understand your concern, but it's unnecessary," the muscular man said. "We are professionals." "Forgive me for being blunt." The professor shrugged. "I didn't see the experts I made an appointment with. Instead, you guys came. I can only say that you're barely sublimators." It could be seen that he was quite polite. Even if he was disappointed, he still restrained himself in his choice of words. 9 sublimators, 3 third order, and 6 second order. This was already a valuable force in the present realm, but in the professor's eyes, it was still not enough to accomplish his goal. "I spent a lot of money, do you understand? In order to get this collection. I overdrew 20 years of my salary." The professor suppressed his dissatisfaction and said seriously, "I want it to be foolproof. It's quality, not quantity." The muscular man said calmly, "The Astronomical Society and the Social Security Bureau have been very strict with the sublimators in Jinling recently. It's inconvenient for high-level sublimators to come, but please don't worry. Our ghoul team is famous for being elites in the cemetery of the deceased. I hope you understand. I don't want mercenaries to come to me with a corpse and say that the mission is completed." The professor raised a finger and said seriously, "I want it alive. Do you understand? I want it alive." Maybe you have a misunderstanding about kidnapping. It's not a violent action, but a highly technical job. The muscular man raised his head proudly. "And like I said, we are professionals. Do you know about the Cat King incident? We did it. Even now, they still think that aliens took him away. Oh, that's one of the curator's favorite collections." The professor's eyes lit up. He stood up enthusiastically and held the man's hand. "I'm relieved. What about the plan? Tell me about the plan." He picked up the bottle of whiskey and drank half of it in one breath. He sat on the sofa and listened attentively. "How are we going to transfer my dear collection from Jinling to the Human Exhibition Hall at the border? This is a thorough plan." The leader of the ghoul squad took out a thick stack of plans from his backpack and placed it in front of him. "These days, we've come up with different plans to capture them. Tomorrow is the best time to act. The preparation for the operation is complete. We have bribed the relevant personnel of the ABRSM. When the time comes, all of us will enter as staff members. According to your additional requirements, we have arranged an identity for you. When the target arrives, we can officially start the kidnapping." "Yes, yes." The professor became even more focused and nodded. "So, how do you kidnap him? As far as I know, the combat power of that item is not low. After all, it is a legendary investigator. How can we successfully capture him? If we only rely on force, I'm afraid it won't be enough, right? Please rest assured." Behind the captain, a gentle-looking man with glasses pushed his glasses up proudly. "We have grasped his biggest weakness, his only good friend." As he spoke, he took out a photo from his pocket and placed it on the table. In the photo, it was a girl in the prime of her life. Fui. According to our eavesdropping and investigation, she plans to go to the scene to personally cheer for her friend. The man with glasses said, "At that time, we will disguise ourselves as members of Green Day, take down his friend first, and threaten to take revenge on the Astronomy Association. According to a psychologist's profiling analysis, there is a 90% chance that he will agree to exchange identities with Fu Yi and become a hostage. Then we will quickly take him down and evacuate quickly." After the man with glasses finished speaking, he proudly raised his head and waited for praise. But the professor was stunned for a long time and asked curiously, "That's it? What else?" He asked, "Is this the only plan? Although the step of throwing the blame to Green Day is pretty good, what about the rest?" There must be other preparations to do, right? The man with glasses raised his eyebrows slightly. Was this a client who absolutely didn't want to take any risks? It didn't matter. This kind of client was easier to deal with. It was much more reliable than those clients who liked to blindly give orders when they had a bit of money. Thus, he placed stack after stack of backup plans on the table. Please take a look. This is a measure to disrupt the Astronomy Association's spies when the time comes. This is a plan to mislead the Social Security Bureau's investigation. And this is one of the preparations to ensure the smooth implementation of the capture plan. He explained in detail. To be on the safe side, we have replaced all the green plants in the room with purple flowers from the border. Under the influence of the flower fragrance, he will be paralyzed by the origin substance in less than 10 minutes and won't be able to use the stigmata. 2 additional teams of armed personnel will attack when the situation worsens. And there are a total of 6 backup plans and 17 escape plans. We will definitely send you and your collection to the appearance realm in one piece. After he finished speaking, he smiled. By this time tomorrow, you will be able to admire your new collection in the exhibition hall. Very good. The professor's eyes were already sparkling when he heard the other party's description. Let's do it. Thus, the captain and the professor shook hands. Both parties had a standard business smile on their faces. Please remember to give us a 5-star rating on the collection of sins after the mission is completed, the captain said humbly. We are just a little bit away from reaching the target this year. The professor nodded and downed the whiskey in one gulp. He wiped his mouth and said, "No problem." And so, a professor in the human exhibition hall and a group of mercenaries from the border. The plan began just like that. The next day, early morning, Huaisher stood in front of the hotel with a pair of panda eyes. He saw AI Ching sitting in the car outside. "Why are you here?" "It's on the way," she said. "Jinling Music and Art Museum, right? I can give you a ride." Thank you, thank you." Huaisher was holding a sandwich that he had just taken out from the kitchen. He carried the piano case and squeezed into the car. After wolfing down a few mouthfuls, he drank a large bottle of cold coffee. Breakfast was finished. "Why do you look like you've been struck by lightning and are about to die?" "Well, it's a long story." He couldn't tell her that he was so focused on learning how to fight that he completely forgot to revise. He also couldn't tell her that he spent the entire night practicing the piano in the Book of Destiny. It was like rowing a boat against the current. If he didn't advance, he would fall back. There was a saying that if he didn't practice for 1 day, he would know. If he didn't practice for 2 days, the teacher would be furious. Once his hand became rusty, it would take a lot of effort to get it back. He reached out and wiped his face. He used the life force of the mountain ghost's sacred mark to forcefully wipe away the puffy circles under his eyes and tied up his hair. "Didn't sleep well last night?" "Yeah, I was a little nervous. After all, I prepared for more than half a year." Huaisher smiled and patted the piano case next to him. "But it looks like I'm in good shape. I can definitely pass. You don't have to promise me anything." AI Ching looked at his confident face and went silent for a long time. She suddenly asked, "Do you really like the cello that much?" "I don't know," Huaisher answered without hesitation. AI Ching frowned. She seemed unhappy. "I don't know in the literal sense." Huaisher scratched his head and looked helpless. "In fact, I can't remember why I want to learn the cello. In my impression, my mother seems to like it. Maybe she thinks that her son learning this instrument will make her proud. Speaking of liking it, I might not have liked it before. But later, when I was so poor that I could only rely on playing the cello to earn some money to buy noodles to eat, unconsciously, I started to like it. Maybe it's the feeling of depending on each other. Without it, I would have starved to death." With that, he held the cello case and showed it to AI Ching. Although it's old, the sound is great. I've been tinkering with it for so long that I'm reluctant to change it. If you have time, I'll play it for you. No need. AI Ching looked at the cello case next to Huai Shi. After a long time, she withdrew her gaze. In that case, keep it well. Along the way, AI Ching did not say anything. She quietly closed her eyes and rested. The car was unusually smooth. It even left room for Huai Shi to look at the score for a while. After bypassing the rush hour congestion, they passed through high-rise buildings and finally stopped in front of the Jinling Music and Art Museum. It was close to the start of the exam. At the door, there were already many young people carrying cello cases and their teachers or parents. Although the professional exam required an appointment, the scope of the ABRSM exam was not limited to the cello. It covered the range of almost all mainstream instruments. It was expected that there would be many candidates. After all, it was a level exam that was popular in the central city of London. It had quite a wide range of credibility. The 8th grade could almost be regarded as a high school diploma. But after passing through the gate, the car did not stop. It kept driving forward. Past. Huai Shi reminded. No, it's a long walk from the front door. AI Ching raised her eyes and looked out the window. Go in from the back door, turn right, and there's an elevator to the 6th floor. Huh. Huai Shi was taken aback. Have you been there before? AI Ching did not answer. The car stopped. It's time for you to take the exam. Huai Shi, she said, I hope you can realize your dream. Thank you. Huai Shi smiled gratefully, picked up the cello case, and waved goodbye to her. It was as if she was deliberately avoiding Huai Shi's gaze. In the end, AI Ching did not raise her eyes to look at him. She just silently stared at the silhouette of the building. She gradually lowered her eyes. Chapter 198. After registering in front of the elevator, Huai Shi entered the waiting area and found a place to sit down. Accustomed to the pressure, Huai Shi took his time to look at the violin score. But as time passed and the people in front of him entered the examination room, one by one, Huai Shi became more and more nervous. It was like the college entrance examination. No matter how good you were at your studies, you would inevitably have to walk in fear. Compared to the girl next to him who was holding the violin and was about to cry, Huai Shi felt that his psychological quality was good, but he still couldn't help but feel a little nervous, especially in his heart. He didn't know why, but there was a bad premonition that made him feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. He actually felt a little flustered for the first time in a long time. In the silence, Huai Shi suddenly stood up and attracted a lot of attention. He smiled stiffly. Excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom. He walked stiffly, completely unaware that he was walking all the way. It was reflected in the monitor screen. Exam room 8. Thank you for your participation, Miss. It was a very good performance. Examiner James took off his glasses and walked over to shake hands with the female examinee, whose eyes were a little red. He helped her up and said in a gentle tone, "The exam is over. We will make a careful evaluation of your performance later." James, who was in his 30s, was tall and had a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. His smile was amiable. Although the ABRSM exam was strict as an examiner, he would try his best to create a stable environment for the students to play. He had also seen a lot of things like this. After gently comforting the examinee, James sent the examinee out of the examination room. He sorted out the previous examinee's score a little, glanced at today's schedule, and rubbed the corner of his eyes tiredly. The professional performance exam generally took more than 2 hours. It was also a very energy-consuming thing for the examiner. Before starting, James also had to rest for a while. Why sure? He scrutinized the examinee's profile and sighed as he looked at the handsome face on it. He was younger than he thought. He didn't rest for long when the phone on the table rang. After picking up the phone, he was stunned. A temporary change of examiner. He frowned unhappily. Why didn't the committee inform me? It happens sometimes, doesn't it? Said the voice on the phone. That only applies during the training period for new examiners. Leona, this is against the rules and it will affect my work. Jamie, you owe me one. After listening to his nagging, the female voice on the phone became serious. Do me a favor. I'll help you during the year-end rating. In the silence, James was the first to admit defeat. He tugged at his tie impatiently. Don't go too far, Leona. Otherwise, I'll report it to the committee. Take it easy, my dear. No one's going to embarrass you. You just have to sit in your office and have a little rest, she said. You'll have your cake at tea later. Pa, the call was cut off. In the silence, it was as if a soap bubble had been popped. With Weischer's entrance, in just a few minutes, all the security personnel in the building were quickly replaced. More and more unfamiliar faces appeared in the building. They knocked down the original staff, sealed their mouths, tied them up, and violently threw them into the storage room. After changing into new uniforms, they walked to their posts with genial smiles. Weischer, come on, you can do it. After washing his face for 5 minutes, Weischer finally calmed down. He clenched his fists and encouraged himself in the mirror. Unfortunately, the reflection in the mirror did not look excited, although the dark circles caused by staying up late disappeared. After washing his face with cold water for a long time, his face looked even paler. Against the gloomy aura of Hilghost, he looked like he was going to die on the spot. After staring at himself for a long time, Weischer felt a little discouraged and did not dare to look at himself anymore. Fortunately, his mood finally calmed down a lot. On the way back, he also splurged on the vending machine and bought 2 bottles of hot drinks, one for drinking and the other to warm his hands. I can pass. I can pass. How can I not pass? Weischer frantically encouraged himself and comforted himself. As long as nothing unexpected happens, this exam is in the bag. Then something unexpected happened. Weischer. Behind him, a voice sounded with surprise and joy. It's really you? Weischer turned around in surprise and only saw a familiar old man. He seemed to have seen him somewhere before. Who are you? The graceful old man's face twitched visibly. Elder Zhao, who had not appeared in the Book of Destiny, showed a helpless expression. We met at your school's anniversary celebration. Weischer was stunned, and his heart tightened. He suddenly realized why this old man looked so familiar. Wasn't this the face on his introductory cello textbook? Why did it seem like he had seen him before? Recalling his past transgressions at the school's anniversary celebration, his heart suddenly tightened again. What did that woman Crow do with his face? He reached into his pocket and quickly flipped through the records left by Crow. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. It was only drugged after understanding the cause and effect. He immediately got up and squeezed out a smile. Elder Zhao, long time no see. I was a little nervous and did not recognize you. Why are you here? With both hands, he respectfully handed over a pot of hot grapefruit tea. The boss drank tea. It's okay. I can understand. Elder Zhao took the tea and generously patted him on the shoulder. He really cherished this kind of junior with a limitless future. When Richard told me that he saw your name on the public list at the entrance, I didn't dare to believe it. I repeatedly confirmed with the front desk several times. Don't be nervous. Are you confident? Weischer forced herself to remain firm and grinned. Isn't this kind of exam a guaranteed success? Oh, that's good. Elder Zhao nodded slightly and suddenly said something out of the blue. I was worried that you would blame me for being a busybody. Huaisher was alerted. He subconsciously turned around and saw the smile on Elder Zhao's face. The feeling of unease in his heart suddenly became stronger. Then he saw a group of white, black, and yellow old men and old women magically appear beside Elder Zhao. Some of the faces were familiar, but some were completely unfamiliar. However, they all looked at him with a smile that made Huaisher even more uneasy. Let me introduce you. Elder Zhao put down the hot grapefruit tea in his hand and pointed at the fat old man at the front and said, "This is the famous performer Mr. Newman, who happened to be in Exine for the 4th Chopin Music Conference." Oh. Huaisher shook hands with the old man who walked up and then heard him say, "This is Mr. Li, the principal conductor of the Dongsha Jinling Philharmonic Orchestra." Another old man, who was often seen on the cover of textbooks, walked over and patted him on the shoulder enthusiastically. "Not bad, young man." Huaisher was confused. Elder Zhao continued to introduce, "This is the person in charge of ABRSM in Jinling, Miss Vivian. This is the principal cellist of the Venice Philharmonic Orchestra, Sir Schlaughter. This is the organizer of the World Music and Art Tour in Vienna. This is the vice president of the Dongsha Artists Association, Ms. Li. This is the London Academy of Arts. This is the American. This is..." It was as if Elder Zhao was announcing the names of the 16 old men and women. Elder Zhao only ended the introduction when Huaisher was still in a daze. The group of old men and women, who came from almost 40% of the music families in the world, looked at Huaisher as if they were looking at a rare treasure. They surrounded Huaisher and sighed with amazement. Speaking of which, it's really too coincidental. The fat old man Newman looked around at his companions, and finally his eyes fell on the trembling rookie Huaisher. "Mr. Huai, we just heard from Mr. Zhao that your superb talent and charisma are not inferior to Ms. A.I. Ting's. It's really incredible. I didn't expect there to be a second genius like A.I. Ting." "What?" Huaisher was dumbfounded. A.I. Ting? He seemed to have heard the name before, but he couldn't remember. Immediately afterward, Professor Richard from the American Music History Society showed a warm smile and said, "This is the last thing I'm going to tell you. So, please be sure to let us watch this exam." Meow, meow, meow. Huaisher, who had been completely petrified, opened her mouth wide, and her eyes widened to the size of 2. "What the hell are you doing?" Now, he finally figured out the identity of this group of people. His knees suddenly went soft. "Are you kidding me? Please go upstairs and attend the Chopin music seminar. Don't mess around, okay? What the hell is this? Is this an examination room or an international classical music festival? You should pay attention. If someone throws an RPG here, it will be on the BBC headlines in 5 minutes. Before tomorrow, more than a third of the world's musicians will have to wear mourning clothes." Huaisher suddenly felt his vision go dark. It was as if he saw the holy light shining on shit. In the monitoring room, it was cold at the moment. Under the monitoring of several computers and hundreds of cameras, all the information in the entire building was methodically summarized in one place. Team 1 is in position. Team 2 is in position. Reserve team is in position. The collection has entered. The professor has successfully entered and has begun to contact the collection. What about the others? In the monitoring room, the ghoul captain picked up the walkie-talkie. "There's a little more interference. Be careful not to hurt the innocent. Is bait number 1 coming now? Already outside the door." The surveillance outside the field turned to a screen. On the screen was Fu Yi herself holding a cup of milk tea, but the captain frowned and asked in confusion, "Who's the person next to her?" Chapter 199. 10 minutes earlier. Fu Yi, who was at a loss, grabbed a cup of milk tea and looked around in confusion as she checked the map on her phone. As soon as she got out of the subway, she lost her way in the sea of people. Jinling Music and Art Museum. It's nearby, right? But how do I get there? Although it was hard to say, she realized that she seemed to be lost. Are you lost? Someone asked softly. Fu Yi turned around and saw an unfamiliar woman. She was about 4 or 5 years older than her. Her face was beautiful and demure. She had a loose ponytail that rested on her shoulder and a warm smile. She looked like she was going out to buy groceries. She was wearing a loose, long skirt and a knitted sweater. In her hand was a basket filled with fresh meat and vegetables that she had just bought from the supermarket. It was a reassuring older sister. Fu Yi's eyes lit up. She leaned over and pointed at the map on her phone. How do I get there? Art Museum? The older sister tilted her head and looked at it. She then shook her head and said, "The signal is not good here. You're at the wrong location. If you want to go to the Art Museum, you should go from exit B. This is exit C. The direction is wrong." Huh. Fu Yi was stunned for a long time. The older sister raised her hand and pointed at a tall building in the distance. "Just turn right and go straight. I'm going there to buy some fresh seasoning. Why don't we go together?" "Oh, thank you." Fu Yi breathed a sigh of relief and followed behind her. The older sister sensed her vigilance and smiled. She turned around and asked, "Someone in your family works at the Social Security Bureau, right?" Huh. Fu Yi was suspicious and subconsciously became nervous. Then she saw the older sister raise her phone. It was the same model as her phone. "Don't worry, it's the same." The older sister smiled gently and walked in front of her. "Are you here alone? Are you traveling?" "No, I'm here to participate in a competition." Fu Yi breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the same ID. "It's an environmental research project competition in Jinling. I wrote a thesis to try my luck." "Sounds amazing," the older sister exclaimed. "It's just nonsense. It's similar to a 7-year-old child standing in the square with a sign asking everyone to protect the environment. It's just a matter of luck. If you're lucky, you'll get extra points for the college entrance examination. That's still very impressive. When I was your age, I didn't even know what a thesis was. Are you here to watch the performance?" "No, it's a classmate's exam. I came over to cheer him on, but I woke up late. I can't make it now." Fu Yi sighed helplessly. Might as well treat him to a meal. A good classmate, male or female. He's a man, but not the kind you think. Fu Yi shook her head. He's more or less a good brother. Really? I really envy you for having such a pure friendship. The big sister smiled and stopped in her tracks. She pointed at the building beside her. "This is it." Thank you." Fu Yi thanked him gratefully. "It's all right, I'll go first." She turned around and was about to leave when she seemed to have seen something. Suddenly, she froze and raised her eyebrows slightly. "Do you mind if I wait with you?" Huh. Fu Yi was taken aback. "After all, I've never seen anyone play the violin in my entire life." The big sister smiled, but that smile made Fu Yi feel a little uneasy. "I'd like to see it." Fu Yi instinctively wanted to refuse, but under the big sister's gentle smile, she felt that she couldn't say it no matter what. Thinking that it was good to have someone to chat with, she slowly nodded. "That's great. Thank you." The big sister nodded happily and withdrew her gaze from the camera in the corner. "By the way, little sister, what's your name?" "Fu Yi." Fu as in master, Yi as in reliance. "What about you, sister?" I don't sound that good." The big sister took her hand affectionately and led her in the direction of the examination room. "My surname is Luo." She said, "My name is Xian." "There's one more?" The captain frowned. What's going on? It seems to be the person who helped her guide the way. He came over to join in the fun. The on-site monitor asked, should we chase him away? Forget it. Don't complicate matters. The captain said coldly, just take him down together. Be faster later. If he resists, kill him directly. Roger. Thus, under the captain's orders, the plan seemed to have begun to run smoothly. It was as smooth as flowing water. With professional skills and rich experience, the result would surely be clear, right? And on the other side, in the examination room, the exam was about to begin. Although the original examination room had not expected so many people to come and watch, it was still spacious and bright enough. After a group of old men and women came in, it did not seem crowded, but Huaishur was almost suffocating. To describe it in a more fantastical way, it was as if the aura of more than a dozen celestial lords was descending, crushing everything. Not to mention the great Tao. Huaishur's brain was about to be ground out. If there was any comfort, it was probably the green plants in the corner of the examination room. The growth was pleasing, and the flowers were quite gorgeous. The fragrance was refreshing, making Huaishur's mood faintly relax. What flowers? Could they let him take 2 pots away? Soon, a dozen burly security guards came in carrying chairs. The group of old men sat down, according to their seats, like the heroes of Liangshan. Finally, they looked at Huaishur in the center of the examination room. Huaishur stood up straight, subconsciously, and squeezed out a stiff smile to please them. Don't be nervous, Mr. Huai. Richard took over the role of the examiner and sat at the front. He flipped through the 3 lists of songs submitted by Huaishur and calmly comforted him. Don't worry, everyone here has rich performance experience and attainments. Naturally, they will make a fair judgment for your performance. Just treat it as a small performance. Scared me to death. I thought you all had rich experience and would not laugh in any situation. Huaishur cursed in his heart. He smiled stiffly and quietly raised his eyes to look at the group of people behind Vivian. Although they were smiling more brightly and warmly than the other, once they got into the mood, the group of old men and women looked serious as if they were taking a portrait. It was chilling to be stared at by those dozen pairs of eyes. Elder Zhao, I really hate you. Huaishur shivered, looked back with tears in his eyes, and picked up the bow. He's a little nervous. To be honest, he's too young. I don't believe there will be a second genius like AI. While Huaishur was looking at the group of old people, the group of old people was also looking at him and exchanging opinions in a low voice. Although Elder Zhao had praised Huaishur's ability, this group of people would not be lenient on account of Elder Zhao. On the contrary, they were very picky. Any small mistake would be picked out with a magnifying glass. Although it was not to the extent of raising the requirements of the performance, to satisfy them was not something a young person could do. Of course, they were also very clear about this. Most of them were just here to relax after the meeting to build the orchestra. They didn't have high expectations. Under the scrutiny of the crowd, Huaishur took a deep breath and lowered his eyes. He played his cello. Richard was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes lit up. Wonderful! When the melody sounded, Schlatter, who had been immersed in the cello for many years, could not help but raise his eyebrows. Toccata in C major, the second movement of Bach's Opus 5, 64, Adagio. Toccata BW V5, 64. Adagio. This was a cello piece without much accompaniment. It seemed that the young man did not intend to use the help of accompaniment, but this was also good. In this kind of similar solo, the true level of the performer could be more directly expressed. However, before he had time to evaluate the quality of the opening phrase, a melody with a distant melancholy silently drowned him, accompanied by the cold sound of the piano. When the two tight parts of the first section spread out in the bass, a melody as heavy as mercury emerged from the dissipating residual sound. It was a deep texture that could be clearly felt between every turn. The piano sound, which was easy to jump out with a slight mistake, was covered by the low key and wrapped in the deep gravity unique to the cello. In the blink of an eye, the heavy melody turned into mist and spread out from between the zither bows. The solemn sadness in the melody was like rain sprinkling in everyone's heart. Schlatter subconsciously sat up straight and tensed up. He stared at the young man, who was playing the piano with his head lowered. Even if his skills and techniques were not outstanding, his terrifying emotional control and charisma were simply amazing. More importantly, it was that familiar fingering technique and playing habit. It was exactly the same as the woman on the stage 10 years ago. Coincidence? Or could it really be the second AI? He looked at Commander Lee next to him in amazement, only to find that Commander Lee was also looking at him. The look in his eyes was the same astonishment and surprise. Now, no one was speaking. Everyone was listening in silence. Their originally lazy expressions had unknowingly turned serious. Vivian, who had been an examiner for more than 10 years, also raised the pencil in her hand and was ready to score. It was just a pure and simple performance without an earth-shattering and intense melody directly showing the skeleton and structure of the music score. The simple sound of the cello directly expressed the composer's sorrow and melancholy directly from the heart. But now, this was no longer in the category of professional appreciation. Even ordinary people could feel the strong sadness in the sound of the cello. The more simple the movement, the more it could show the performer's talent and foundation. But now, the rich emotion that accompanied the evolution of the melody was like a tide, sweeping everything away. The unique weight and solemnity of the cello were fully displayed in the hands of this young man, who was not even 20 years old. There was no doubt that this was the so-called genius. Chapter 200. When the short movement came to an end, the simple melancholy dissipated with the gradually reverberating low melody. Huaisher finally woke up from his concentration. Then he heard whispers. Just when he thought that he had messed up and that this was some special booing, he saw the smiles on the faces of the old men and women who were serious and harsh just now. Wonderful. Vivian did not hide her amazement and admiration. She took the initiative to comment, "What an unexpected control and mastery. Why, you have vividly expressed everything that Mr. Bach had entrusted to this staccato. I don't think this is the level that should appear in a professional examination. I can only say that Commander Zhao's vision is indeed unusual." After a brief evaluation, everyone looked at the most professional cellist on the scene, Schlatter. After a moment of silence, Schlatter opened his mouth and said, "Forgive me for being blunt, but I can see that there are certain flaws in your fingering and playing of the bow. This may affect your performance in certain musical pieces. Your foundation is still lacking, so I can't give you full marks in this aspect. However, your strengths and weaknesses are equally obvious. It would be too harsh to nitpick on your excellent performance. This is a beautiful piece of music performed in an elegant manner, and it properly shows the unique charm of the cello and your talent. If I were the examiner, I would directly give you an A grade in this segment. But of course, this depends on Ms. Vivian's opinion." Of course, before this qualified performance, Vivian was naturally willing to give a hand. "To be honest, I have never seen such a wonderful performance in the first segment in so many years." The green light was given so quickly, Huaisher was overjoyed. He did not expect to get a 5-star rating. It was like a newly hired civil servant being collectively praised by a group of senior officials. Originally, the performance segment was to perform 3 songs, each of which was 30 points. Now, with a slight nod from the big bosses, 90 points was in his hands. He suddenly felt elated by this sudden performance, as if he saw a glorious future waving at him. Then, he heard the discussion between Schlatter and Vivian. In my opinion, we can skip the following tests on syllables and hearing, Schlatter suggested. Why don't we make some changes in the visual performance? Vivian pondered for a moment. The group of old men and women sat together and whispered to each other. However, that expectant look made Weischer feel that something was wrong. What are you trying to do? This feeling was like an 8-year-old child being surrounded by his 7 aunts and 8 aunts during the new year, asking him to perform. It was only now that Weischer vaguely understood what he had just done. He had completely aroused the curiosity of this group of old men and women. Now, they would not stop until they saw his limit. Weischer, who had just left the beginner's village, saw the scene of the max-level monsters holding a meeting in front of him and became increasingly flustered. As for Elder Zhao, he seemed to be afraid that Weischer was not completely panicking, so he actually joined in with enthusiasm, loudly praising Weischer. "Oh my God, what are you guys trying to do?" Weischer trembled. Soon, after Vivian sent a message, a secretary came in with a stack of music scores that had just been removed from the printer and placed it in front of Weischer. "I can see that those songs are not enough to show your best level." Vivian smiled and said approvingly, "Let's do something difficult." Weischer picked up the music score anxiously and only saw the first line of standard English font. Then his vision went black. Paganini, Caprice number 24-inch, Paganini's 24th Caprice. Oh my God, you guys are King killing me. I just leveled up less than 2 days ago. A few months ago, I was still practicing the CC on the streets. You can't just give me a War God catalog just because my great ancestor's fist is too good, okay? If I could play this song well, I could do something else. Why did I have to come here today? Back then, that bastard Paganini claimed to be able to play a song with a G string. Why don't you let me do it once? He held back a mouthful of old blood and looked up in despair, wanting to change the song, but he saw a group of old men and women staring at him, eagerly waiting for his performance. Their eyes were shining like the windows of hell. "Little brother, you can do it. Don't be afraid. Just do it. Don't hide it. Quickly take out the good stuff and let us see it." "Okay, I understand." Weischer smiled with difficulty and said to himself, "Isn't it just a performance of Caprice? Don't be scared." He took a deep breath, lowered his head, and focused on the music score in front of him. He entered a state of meditation. The source flame that was difficult for ordinary people to see lit up in his eyes. He focused on the lines of notes in front of him, and the illusory sound of the zither filled his ears. The old men seemed to be able to understand his difficulties and did not care that he had exceeded the time limit. Instead, they patiently waited for him to finish reading the music score. Their eyes were filled with curiosity and joy as if the prank had succeeded. Elder Zhao seemed to have already understood their bad taste. It was obvious that he had encountered similar tests and difficulties in the past. But when he looked at Weischer, his eyes contained a trace of curiosity. He was not worried that Weischer would be depressed or dispirited after messing up on such an important occasion. The so-called genius should have such a degree of resistance to pressure. Otherwise, why would he perform? Wouldn't it be better to go home and entertain himself than anything else? He was just curious, with Weischer's ability to advance by leaps and bounds, to what level he could perform this intense melody that was thought to come from the devil. In any case, in the eyes of this group of old men, this was just an additional question at the end of the exam. Even if he answered it correctly, there would be no points added. but if he could answer it correctly, then he would be a truly good student. In that case, what was Huaisher's limit? In the silence, the clock on the wall silently turned to 11 o'clock. The hour hand, the minute hand, and the second hand, for a moment, all of them perfectly overlapped in one place. At that moment, in the monitoring room, the ghoul captain suddenly stood up and picked up the walkie-talkie in his hand. A cold light flashed in his eyes. "Begin the operation." In the blink of an eye, everyone looked up. An inescapable net had been set up, sealing off the last gap. The hunt had begun. Monitoring network alert. Yao Ke's voice rang out in the command center's channel. Jinling's lock has detected an origin substance fluctuation. Preliminary comparisons have confirmed that one of the visiting professors from the infernal organization, the Human Exhibition Bureau, has infiltrated the scene. The location is at the Jinling Music and Art Museum. Members on standby in the lounge, please prepare to move out in 3 minutes. The Human Exhibition Bureau. Yuan Zhao, who was playing games in the lounge, suddenly jumped up. He didn't care about the intense team battle on his phone. His eyes lit up in joy. Isn't that a level 3 alert? In the Jinling Social Security Administration, the alert was divided into 5 levels. The usual state of alert was level 5, the border species invasion was level 4, and level 3 was the emergency state when an important wanted criminal was discovered. It required all the sublimators on standby to move out quickly and eliminate the hidden danger as quickly as possible. Although the situation was urgent, Yuan Zhao suddenly became excited. Wasn't this the perfect time for him to show off his skills? Thinking about it, in front of everyone's eyes, Yuan Zhao, would take the lead with a silver spear in his hand and defeat the freak from the Human Exhibition Bureau in one move. Wouldn't that be wonderful? When he thought about how his teammates would look at him with admiration, Yuan Zhao's face turned red with excitement. He kicked the chair of his sleepy teammate and picked up his spear. Let's go, let's go. He took the lead and rushed out of the lounge. Let's go. Behind him, his teammates looked at the excited Yuan Zhao in confusion. They looked down at the detailed briefing on their phones and looked at each other. Well, let's not tell this kid that Huaisher is nearby. Let him be happy for a while. The Social Security Administration make an emergency move. In the examination room, the silence was finally broken. Huaisher put down the score in his hand. I'm done. He raised his eyes and let out a long breath of air from the bottom of his heart. In his mind, the illusory and broken zither sounds finally slowly merged into one. The intense melody was like countless blades scraping in his consciousness. In meditation, the illusory zither sound seemed to have changed. Under the reflection of the alchemy fire, it was given substance. When the two collided, there was a burst of soul-shaking low sound. Huaisher had never been in such a hurry to learn a song like this. Even with the Book of Destiny in his hand, he actually felt a little tired at this moment. If it wasn't for the nourishment of the flower fragrance, he would probably be in a more difficult situation. Huaisher raised his sleeve and wiped the sweat on his face, but he saw a piece of tissue handed over. Aren't you in too much of a hurry? Mr. Zhao saw the blood in his eyes and said softly, Huaisher, this is just an exam. You understand? I know this. Huaisher nodded, wiped the sweat on his face, and sighed softly as if relieved of a burden. Actually, I was distracted for a while. Huh. Mr. Zhao was puzzled. I've been thinking about a friend's question this morning. Huaisher said, she asked me, do I like the cello? And the result is that I still don't understand. Huaisher smiled, patted the zither in his arms, and chuckled softly. To be honest, I don't know how much of my persistence is to make more money, and how much is because I really love it. However, even if I have no talent and no pursuit of art. It has accompanied me for so many years and suffered so much with me. I think I must like it." Mr. Zhao raised his eyes slightly. He didn't expect such an answer. He didn't know if he should feel gratified or shocked. "That's why I feel that I must pass the exam." Huaishur happily raised the bow in his hand and told him with a smile, "To prove that my choice was not wrong, and to prove that the years spent with this zither and me were worth it." Mr. Zhao was silent. He couldn't tell whether he was angry or gratified. He just looked at the now dim signature on the zither case and suddenly chuckled softly. It's good to have such a brilliant attitude in life. He turned and returned to the judge's table. "Don't worry, gentlemen," he told his friends. "Your jokes are easy for him." Schlaughter was stunned and looked blankly at the pale-faced teenager. He was a little worried. "Why, if you're not in a good state, the exam can be suspended. You don't have to be too nervous." "No, sir, I've never been in such a good state." Huaishur smiled at his audience. "Don't worry." The zither score was casually thrown aside, and he didn't even bother to look at it. He lowered his eyes. He could feel his heart beating crazily. Invisible musical notes emerged from the rhythm, as if they had turned into scorching hot iron, burning his blood into blazing lava. They pulsed in his blood vessels and flowed feverishly, and in the left hand that pressed on the strings, there seemed to be an invisible current surging, passing through each finger section by section. The touch was unprecedentedly sensitive, and he could even distinguish every distance in the fine entanglement on the strings. With the skills of a drummer, the touch extended from his hands to the zither. It was as if they were one. His consciousness was unprecedentedly active, and he clearly remembered the position of every note and rhythm. It wedged into the instincts of his body, gradually building the outline of the devil left in the human world. "Let me begin." At that moment, Huaishur raised his eyes. Paganini Capriccio No. 24. Capriccio in a minor. Urgent, the performance began. Then, a hoarse sound burst out from the strings. The old cello suddenly shook, as if it had awakened from a deep sleep. In an instant, there was a sharp sound. Not only Schlaughter, but everyone was stung by the hoarse sound, and fine goosebumps appeared on their skin. Like the friction between a piece of iron and glass, the opening melody was so abrupt and inappropriate, almost like a performance accident, making people feel shocked and unhappy. But then, under the pull of the bow, the fanatical sound of the accident continued to rush forward arrogantly. It suddenly changed from a sharp and smooth sound to a stable one, as if it had formed a wonderful circle. The theme was unfolding. It was like the warning before the opening, the last mercy, because the box of disaster was about to be opened. At that moment, outside the examination room, the door of the candidates' lounge was gently closed by a hand. In the corridor behind the door, heavily armed mercenaries quietly rushed through, like black blood rushing in the darkness. The outer layer was sealed. The inner layer was isolated. The countermeasures were activated, and the main control system was online. Under the ingenious isolation, the entire building was neatly divided into two parts in an instant. The outer layer of the exam was still operating as usual, but the inner layer had turned into an airtight black box. A tangible chill shrouded an inch of space, sealing it inch by inch. Under the command of the monitoring room, the door of the women's washroom was violently knocked open. At the end of the room, the girl in front of the sink turned around in shock, only to see a burly soldier wearing a mask. The leader rushed up, not allowing Fu Yi to resist, and violently covered her face with a handkerchief. Soon, Fu Yi fainted. "The bait is ready." The officer, codenamed Hyena, grinned behind the mask, raised his hand, and pressed the communicator in his ear. "Prepare to break through." On the other side, outside the examination room, the mercenaries holding the door-breaking hammer and large shield raised their weapons, waiting for the command from the monitoring room to continue, just like the performance in the examination room. At this moment, even the thick, soundproof sponge couldn't cover up the sharp melody. With the flick of Huaishir's left index finger, the second repetition, the broken notes were perfectly pieced together, making the sharp and hoarse sound at the beginning completely an inseparable part of the melody. Then, from low to high, the melody soared up step by step, like stepping on an iron ladder, bringing with it heavy echoes. But when it was about to reach the peak, it suddenly went down, like a roller coaster, gradually becoming subtle and low. Silence temporarily arrived. The short melody of 15 seconds made everyone present fall into several degrees of astonishment. However, when they carefully judged this short theme section, they clearly felt a warning charm. A storm was coming. Then they saw Huaishir take a deep breath. The 4 fingers of his left hand on the zither's neck suddenly flicked and pressed down on the strings. Then a crazy melody burst out from the strings like a storm. The slightly clumsy and crude fingering in the eyes of the masters now violently opened the soul-shaking prelude of the 11 variations at an incredible speed. Then the crazy sharp melody pierced through under the stimulation of the bow. The rapid changes in the short span of a finger made it difficult for the eardrums to keep up with the terrifying speed. The 4 fingers on the zither's neck jumped and danced at a speed that the naked eye couldn't follow. Ah, that was indeed a warning from the youth. The examiners finally understood, because he was going to open the brakes of the hell train, because the soul-shaking 11 variations had begun. It was the same theme that was revealed with 11 different techniques and techniques. Back then, Paganini had almost extravagantly flaunted his talent and limits to the world to create a treasure, and now, in the hands of the youth, it was being performed again. But now, everything he witnessed was so unimaginable. The young man who seemed to be clumsy in terms of technique was now using his clumsy method that was not outstanding to complete such a drastic change and change of tone. It wasn't just the Feiden bow that seemed to turn into a phantom, nor was it just the thunder-like string in his left hand. There was also the crazy cycle between the high and low notes and the rapid descent of the double notes. It was something even more unbelievable. He caught up. Schlaughter almost suffocated. That youth actually caught up with Paganini's rhythm. He stared blankly at the youth's pale face and the fanatical and bloodshot expression in his eyes. The fanatical sound burst out from the top. At that moment, outside the toilet, a voice that shouldn't exist here sounded. "This is the ladies' toilet." The big sister squinted her eyes and smiled, staring at the group of uninvited guests. "Even if you need to pee, you shouldn't come here, right?" In an instant of astonishment and shock, everyone in the room turned their heads and saw Luo Xian, who appeared behind them without them knowing when. On the wall outside the door, there was a burst of blood. Just behind her pair of white slippers, a headless corpse fell quietly at the door. There was no more sound in the originally heavily guarded corridor. They should have attacked. They should have pulled the trigger at the first moment. But for some reason, when they stared at that gentle, smiling face, everyone felt an indescribable chill. The chill swallowed them up, freezing their limbs inch by inch, cutting off their nerves and breaking their senses. It was like being scrutinized by a predator. The hunters became the prey. In the dead silence, only Luo Xian raised her head slightly, as if listening to the melody from afar. "That's not bad." She gently nodded and looked at the enemies in front of her. "It sounds like the door of hell has been opened, right?" As she said, her beautiful body bent down slightly and rummaged through the basket at her feet. Finally, she pulled out a fresh green onion wrapped in plastic wrap, swung it in her hand, and shook it twice. It was as if it was a weapon. She smiled and nodded at the enemies. Then let's start here. Behind her, the door closed quietly. The corridor was once again filled with dead silence. Only the terrifying melody that seemed to come from hell sounded in the distance. When the team of the Social Security Bureau broke into the building by jumping over the border, they fell into a daze. Yuan Zhao stared at the tragic scene in front of him in astonishment, not knowing what had happened. At this moment, the corridor outside the examination hall had turned into an out-and-out Avicii hell. Dozens of mercenaries who were armed to the teeth were now a mess of corpses on the ground. Whether it was the ascended or the trained and experienced ordinary people, their corpses were now the same. They were all similarly tragic, as if they had been ravaged by a natural disaster. From one end to the other, Yi Zichen looked at the sky. It was as if an invisible storm had violently galloped past, destroying everything and turning them into ashes and dust. Only dripping blood covered an inch of the pure white wall, and broken organs and limbs were casually scattered on the ground. In the midst of the blood, Emosen bent down and picked up a hairband from the ground that he seemed to have seen before. He turned pale with fright. The hairband with the kitty's smiley face was now dyed blood red. Xiao Xian, as if facing a great enemy, she connected to the command center's channel. Status update. Level 2 alert. Quickly informed Teacher Luo. She raised her head and stared at the depths of the corridor that was dyed red with blood. Behind the tightly shut door, fresh blood was gradually flowing out, and she sucked in a breath of cold air. Luo Xian is out of control. In the midst of the chaos, Yuan Zhao looked around blankly. Finally, he stood in front of the door and looked inside through the small glass window. He was in disbelief. That gigolo was actually playing the piano. Then he finally heard it. In the depths of the darkness, there was the sound of the piano. The melody from hell was like thunder. Chapter 201. Incredible! Some people once said that Paganini was the devil, but now Schlaughter seemed to have seen the devil come to this world at a certain moment. Now, the devil was attached to the thin body of the young man, spreading his sharp laughter to the mortal world. So crazy. Under the incredible influence, everyone felt it was difficult to breathe, like a broken sampan before an earth-shattering tsunami, trembling, turbulent, and involuntary. When the instrument of this variation changed from a violin to a cello, it lost the strange change of the devil's whisper and turned into a thunder that seemed to tremble the earth. Only when the speed of the change of the melody slowed down and gradually became calm, the deep theme hidden under the wind and thunder was slowly revealed, the sorrow and helplessness of watching the devil take his soul away. The train from hell is speeding toward despair. Newman murmured subconsciously, clenched the armrest of the chair, and it was difficult to resist the terrible influence of Huaishi's melody. He was almost drawn into the deep undercurrent hidden under the calm melody. That's right, speeding. The gradually slow rhythm pushed forward irresistibly, with the fear of stepping through the gate of hell step by step, all the way into the deepest part of the fire and purgatory. Death. Death was rising like the bright stars. It was everywhere, flying up from the low melody, crossing the corridor full of corpses, passing through the bloody hell, flying, 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 following the running officers, but one step ahead of them. It was like a step in the abyss. That was why everything in sight was so cruel. Death, death, death. It was obviously just an ordinary corpse, but it seemed to be ravaged by some monster and fell apart. In the pain, even death became relief. In the end, even the screams in the communication channel had disappeared without a trace. In the silent monitoring room, only the last person was left. The last ghoul collapsed on the chair, trembling, and looked at the figure on the screen that walked toward him step by step. His lips buzzed, opened and closed, but he couldn't speak. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. It seemed to be a cry of sorrow, but it couldn't spread in the face of this cold atmosphere. Until finally, the door was pushed open. The girl stood outside the door with a gentle smile, looking at the distorted face. Her white dress was still spotless. However, her fingernails seemed to be smeared with crystal red nail polish. It was so red that it made people despair. "Sorry, I was a little excited earlier, so I didn't pay attention." Luo Xian bent down and put down the basket. She rummaged through it, but there was nothing left in the basket. In the end, she could only stand up regretfully, holding the last remaining items in her hands. Onions and beef ribs. She raised her hands and asked softly, "Which one do you like?" In the frozen silence, the last ghoul faced the first monster and finally let out a scream of despair. Thus, amidst the wailing melody in the distance, a trace of joy suddenly appeared in the notes. It was like a devil's song. There was dead silence in the examination hall. It was indeed the 24th Capriccio, but it was no longer what they knew. At this very moment, the broken notes and the technique that could not be concealed were mixed together by this strong influence and promoted to a perfect and harmonious state. From the hands of this unknown youth, it revealed a style that had never been seen before, an unprecedented pioneering work, and an unprecedented talent. God! Schlaughter bit his finger and stared at the pair of hands on the strings. The 5 fingers played the rhythm according to the player's will. Under the light, faint afterimages were pulled out like a devil's illusion. The youth's pitch-black eyes were now bloodshot, just like the flames of hell. Iron and fire glowed with a fanatical and intoxicating light. After throwing everyone in the room to the back of his mind, Huaishir's eyes drooped. As if there was no one else around him, he played his own melody. Such high confidence and calmness was like a completely different person from before. Unbelievable! At this moment, the eyes of all the examiners lit up with excitement that did not belong to them. It was as if they had seen a miracle. Wonderful! Truly wonderful! The origin substance from the professor didn't care that the hunting hounds he had hired were already dead or injured. He excitedly enjoyed the sounds of hell and laughed in the darkness. "Isn't this a song of praise from hell?" the professor praised. "In today's world, there's still art like this. Almost brushed past such a beautiful work." He was so excited that he could not control himself. Just this one song is better than the so-called legendary title. Huaishir felt as if he had been ignited by a fire that did not exist. On the title page of the Book of Destiny, the line of characters changed wildly, fluctuating from the rhythm, breaking through the limits. After a moment, the column belonging to the cello had already risen from level 6, breaking through the limit of level 10, and reached the jaw-dropping level 12. It broke through the realm of mortals and took the lead to enter the legendary realm. When the rumbling melody seemed to be heading towards hell, his consciousness seemed to have once again transcended the shackles of his body. Stepping on the invisible melody, it was as if he was stepping on an iron staircase, one step at a time, moving upwards. Passing through the darkness that had trapped him for a long time, he faced the wave-like light in his memory. Moving forward, he flew along with the blazing and desolate melody until he left the void of darkness behind and crashed into the light. Boom! The void of thunder burst out from the depths of his skull. Huaishir's consciousness suddenly shook, and the darkness in front of him completely disappeared. He had finally passed through the formless boundary. When he struggled to open his eyes, he only saw an endless glow. The glow was like a tide in the sea. When it was calm, countless beautiful rainbows overlapped in one place, turning into pure silver, reflecting the brilliant stars and sun in the sky. Huaishir stood between the sea and the stars, looking around blankly. There seemed to be faint shadows of people walking around, but he couldn't see clearly. Those figures were minding their own business and gradually moving away, melting into the distant fog. How unexpected! He heard a familiar voice behind him, using the formless melody as a staircase. "You've returned here again?" Huaisher suddenly turned back and saw the crow behind him. It was standing on a rock that protruded out of the sea. Its eyes were still full of frivolous mockery and indescribable pity. But its reflection in the sea was no longer the scene of birds, but the stunning silhouette that was engraved in Huaisher's memory. "Yo, Huaisher!" She chuckled softly in the reflection. "Welcome again to the eternal land that gave birth to all miracles, the Silver Sea." Huaisher looked at her in shock. He opened his mouth to speak, but he saw the silhouette in the reflection reach out her hand and gently touch his forehead. "Unfortunately, I'm afraid you've run out of time." At that moment, Huaisher felt the movement come to an abrupt end with the bow. Then, the slender finger that was ethereal like a phantom pushed forward slightly, and a force like gravity emerged from behind him, pulling him into the void behind him. In a flash, the stars and the sea disappeared without a trace. In his last hurried glance, Huaisher only had time to see the figure standing alone between the stars and the sea, and at her feet, the incomplete silhouette hidden deep under the sea, the incomplete chess piece that was so huge that even the stars were like dust. The abandoned White Queen. Huaisher opened his eyes and felt the soreness and exhaustion in his limbs. The movement was over. He had never thought that just playing would exhaust his mind to this extent. He was so tired that he couldn't stand up. It was as if he had exhausted all his energy in the difficult and crazy performance. He gasped for breath. Sweat slowly slid down his forehead and dripped from his chin. "Pa!" In the fine sound, a dim color was dyed from the neck of the cello. Like the last straw that broke the camel's back, a crack slowly appeared from the wet mark, spreading out in the teeth-aching sound and penetrating the board. Before he could be shocked, he saw the strings full of cracks and the bow in his hand that was about to break. This old violin that had accompanied him for 4 years had finally reached its limit, ushering in the final performance. Huaisher stared blankly at the crack for a long time, then regretfully let go of his hand. He could only find another craftsman to repair it, but he didn't know if he could find a suitable luthier. His heart was heavy. When he slowly lifted his head, all he saw was silence. No one spoke. Only Vivian slowly took off her glasses and placed them on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. "What is this?" She seemed to be still immersed in the fanatical and sorrowful melody. Her eyes were a little red, and she suppressed her hoarse voice. "This is fate, my dear." Newman sighed, thinking of her daughter, who died young. He reached out and gently pressed her shoulder. "I think this is an unfortunate fate." In the silence that made Huaisher particularly uneasy, Conductor Li, who was sitting in the front, raised his hand and applauded, offering his own amazement for this wonderful performance. Then, the applause that was so warm that Huaisher couldn't believe it sounded from the old man's hand, almost breaking through the soundproof door of the examination room. "Perfect! Perfect!" Schlaughter, who woke up from the surprise, was the first to stand up, no longer hiding his admiration. The abundant emotion is enough to cover all the flaws in the technique and the demonic appeal. "You are simply a born musician. Why, I can already foresee the emergence of a master. No, a second Paganini. It's hard to imagine that the elegant and peaceful Ms. AI would teach such a wild student." Newman stepped forward and wanted to shake his hand. "I believe that in less than 2 years, there will be a place for you in Vienna." Ms. Glan, who had maintained a cold expression from beginning to end, was more direct. "Have you signed the contract?" "Huh." Huaisher was stunned and didn't react. "Why, EMG welcomes you." Later, that old ghost Newman will definitely fart again. But Rolling Stone will always only make mediocre rock. If you don't want to be someone's accompaniment forever, EMG is the most suitable for you. Without waiting for Weischer to respond, she stuffed a business card into Weischer's hand. Think about it. Before she could finish, Newman, the fat old man from Texas, squeezed her to the side with his weight advantage. The old man from Texas grabbed Weischer's hands to prevent her from running away. Then, he kept on praising Rolling Stone. He was surrounded by a group of old men and women whose eyes were shining with the light of the dollar. All kinds of business cards were stuffed into his hands, and then they asked him all kinds of questions. From when he played the piano to whether he had been in love, it was like a group of gossip reporters. Anyway, let me say thank you first. Weischer suddenly spoke, interrupting the old people's praises. He carefully put the cello in his hand on the chair, turned around, and bowed respectfully to thank them. Thank you for your praise, teachers, and thank you for letting me finish this exam and fulfill a wish. As he spoke, he raised his eyes, took out a gun from his pocket, and slowly loaded it. He looked around at the stunned faces and said softly, "Although I'm quite slow, it's not to the extent that I can't detect so many deadly spheroid outside. I'm not boasting, but I'm quite sensitive to the malice of others. Now," he said, "maybe I can discuss with the gentleman hiding here how to solve the problem." Chapter 202. Time seemed to stand still for a moment. The entire examination hall was engulfed in darkness, and the old people disappeared without a trace. When the light came back, he seemed to have arrived under a warm light. Under the warm yellow light, the ancient books on the bookshelves exuded an ancient aura unique to the passage of time. Between the bookshelves were two old sofas, and on the table was a bucket of ice and wine. Whiskey or champagne? The blond man, sitting behind the table, raised his head and asked him, "Can I have both?" Weisher thought for a long time, then slowly sat across from him, placed the gun on the table, and found a comfortable position. "I don't think I've had any before." "Then whiskey it is. I have a bottle of Baijiu from Hell in Ingzhou. It's 40 years old, and it's rare to meet a guest who's worthy of tasting it." The professor snapped his fingers, and an old bottle of wine appeared on the table. "Do you want ice? If you haven't, I recommend water. The aroma of the wine will be even clearer." "Okay." Thus, the amber-colored liquor was poured into an ice-cold cup and mixed with the pure water. After the alcohol was diluted, the faint smell of smoke and flowers became more distinct. "Please." The professor smiled. "You should like it." Weisher wasn't afraid that the professor would poison him. To be honest, after being trained by Crow and experiencing it himself countless times, he was now an expert in the use of poisons. Other than the rich negative origin substance and life force in this glass of wine, there was no poison at all. It might be highly toxic to ordinary people, but to a negative energy generator like him, it was similar to a blue bottle. A line of wine entered his throat and immediately turned into a raging fire, burning Weisher until he was a little red. The rich fragrance of the flowers wrapped around the tip of his nose, and in an instant he was a little intoxicated. Soon he woke up and felt that the mountain ghost sacred mark had become full of vitality. This rare supplement actually allowed Weisher's divine mark to improve greatly. Her weakness and fatigue were also dispelled, and her spirit was greatly boosted. "Good wine," Weisher praised. "Take it as compensation for my rude behavior." The professor smiled and said, "To be honest, I'm not good at fighting. If you came in with an axe, I could only run away. I want to thank you for being willing to sit down and talk with me." "So what's going on?" Weisher looked around. "Did I offend someone again? I haven't introduced myself yet." The professor picked up a business card and handed it over with both hands. After seeing the words Human Exhibition Bureau, Weisher suddenly understood and raised his head. "Yes, I'm the one who posted the bounty. To be honest, I don't have anything as precious as a legendary investigator in my collection. I'm really itching for it." The professor smiled shyly. "But after seeing your performance with my own eyes, I changed my mind. The so-called legendary investigator title is nothing compared to your true value." "True value?" The professor gestured for him to flip the name card over, and when he saw the other name card, he froze on the spot. "Hell, the voice? Yes, 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 this is it," the professor said excitedly. "This is a popular competition in Hell, and it's not inferior to the cooking demon competition. In addition to being a guest professor of the Human Exhibition Bureau, I'm also an examiner of the Hell Music Society and a member of the organizing committee of The Voice. When I first heard your performance, I felt that a person like you shouldn't stay in the collection room. Instead, you should shine on a better stage. Your art should be listened to by all the leaders of the large groups. How about it? Are you interested? How about we sign a contract? I promise that within 3 years, your concert will be popular all over Hell. What the hell is The Voice? Are you crazy? Sorry, I'm not interested." Weisher threw away the name card expressionlessly. "Now let's talk about the bounty." He knocked on the table and said coldly, "After all, there are some things that even an apology can't make up for, right? That's such a pity." The professor didn't care about Weisher's coldness. He was still immersed in the disappointment of being rejected. After hearing that, he shrugged helplessly. "I thought we could turn enemies into friends. What a pity. After all, I also failed, didn't I? That kind of plot in comics shouldn't be brought into reality, right? Yes, the professor sighed. If we're talking about fighting, to be honest, I don't have the confidence to win against the legendary investigator. I can only leave first. He suddenly raised his wrist, grabbed the pistol on the table, and pointed it at Huaisher's face. He pulled the trigger. Boom! A hole appeared in the ceiling. The moment he held the gun, Huaisher had already grabbed his wrist tightly. He lifted it up and shook it violently. The strength of the drumming hand exploded, exploding from his wrist to the front and back. Therefore, in an instant, the bones in his arm broke inch by inch. The palm holding the gun was completely twisted beyond recognition. The pistol flew out of his hand and fell from the air. In Huaisher's left hand, iron light had already lit up. The sacrificial knife appeared, pierced through the broken palm, and extended downward. Like a butcher dismembering an ox, it swept across. Wherever it passed, all the flesh and blood turned into charcoal and ashes under the violent extraction. The professor's expression was stiff, but before he could scream, Huaisher had already stood up. The blade of the axe appeared in his right hand and chopped down, cutting off the professor's right hand. Then he raised the knife and axe in both hands and chopped down at the unsuspecting enemy in front of him. The iron light burst out like a tide, drowning the professor. The speed was unprecedentedly fast. When he became a drummer in barehanded combat, Huaisher found that his weapon had also undergone a qualitative transformation. But for some reason, the knife and sword that he used to wield like an arm in the past always felt awkward when he held them in his hand at the moment. He didn't know what was wrong, as if he had never used them correctly. It was a little off. But even if it was a little off, it was still far better than his wild chopping in the past. In the blink of an eye, the professor was almost completely cut into pieces. But then a brilliant light burst out from his hand, and the spear of compassion whizzed out. It pierced through. Bang! A bloody mist erupted. The professor's broken body had already pierced through the blade of the spear and nailed deeply into the wall, causing the narrow border space to be on the verge of collapse and violently shake. Beautiful! In the burning of the mountain ghost's source flame, the professor, who had long been dead, raised his only eye with difficulty and looked at Huaisher's face. One life to pay for another. Can it make up for your anger? He's not dead yet. Huaisher was stunned and immediately reacted. This bastard was probably a border mutant or a member of a large group. The one who came here was probably something like a split soul or a double body. I sincerely hope that one day I can listen to your performance again. As if he was afraid that his sincerity was not enough, the professor sincerely said goodbye. So, let us meet again in hell, Mr. Huaisher. If you change your mind, I will be waiting for your arrival at any time. His body quickly shattered, and in the intense pain of burning the source flame, he grimaced at Huaisher, revealing a smile of farewell. Along with the entire room, it silently dissipated into green smoke. Silently, Huaisher returned to his original place, holding a business card and a strange certificate in his hand. The pitch-black cover of the certificate seemed to be wrapped in a layer of steel, and it was heavy to the touch. After opening it, there was a line of large golden words. After the source flame was inputted, it quickly transformed into the Eastern Xia language that Huaisher was most familiar with, and the phantom of a scepter slowly rose. Professional Qualification Certificate, Professional Level. Evaluation results are excellent. On this day, we congratulate Mr. Huaisher for passing the test and becoming the 199th Calamity Musician. We hope that you can continue to display this art from hell in your future performances. The United Music Association of Hell. Attached. Young man, you played well. Although it's still far from my level, it can be considered a bit of a highlight. Vice President Paganini. What United Music Association of hell? Are you crazy? What the F asterisk CK Paganini? You bastard, you caused so much trouble when you were alive, and you really went to hell after you died. Huaishir's expression twitched, and he was about to throw it away, but after thinking about it, it was better to have it than not, so he could only resentfully stuff it into his pocket. Besides, Paganini praised you for playing well. How honorable would it be if word got out? Although it was a bit strange, it was still a compliment for the time being. He raised his head and saw the old people with blank faces. It was as if they were in a dream, and they didn't notice the conversation between Huaishir and the professor just now. They were still immersed in Huaishir's incredible performance. Seeing that they were about to rush up and continue to grab Huaishir to chat, Huaishir could only take advantage of the fact that they were still confused to say goodbye and leave as if he was running away. These days were too King magical. Without paying attention, he could get a double certificate from the discovery and hell when he came out for the exam. It was so strange. In short, one of his wishes was fulfilled, and Huaishir felt refreshed for the first time in a long time. Carefully putting the cello back into the case, Huaishir thought about where to find a suitable luthier to repair it. He picked up the case and pushed the door open. Then he saw an empty, spotless corridor, and Yuan Zhao, who was stunned at the door. "Huh, kid, why are you here?" Huaishir rudely reached out and rudely rubbed Yuan Zhao's hair, crushing the hard work of teacher Tony at the entrance of the Social Security Bureau into a mess. But Yuan Zhao was stunned and didn't answer. He looked at him as if he was looking at a ghost. "What's wrong?" Huaishir tilted his head and looked at him for a long time, but he didn't get a response. He helplessly shook his head, then continue to be in a daze. "I won't disturb you." He picked up the case and walked out of the examination room. In the corner of the lounge, he saw an unexpected figure, the girl leaning on the chair and sleeping. Fu Yi. Hey, wake up." Huaishir walked over, bent down, and looked at the girl's sleeping face. After hesitating for a long time, he couldn't help but reach out and carefully poke her cheek. Fu Yi. In Huaishir's voice, Fu Yi seemed to have finally woken up. She sleepily opened her eyes and was a little dizzy. "Huaishir, you finished the exam? Where's that kind big sister? Did she leave?" "Big sister? She should have left, right?" Huaishir looked around and didn't see anyone. "How was the exam?" "Pretty good." Huaishir was proud and beaming with joy. The instructor was stunned. "I'm super awesome." "It looks like the results are pretty good." Fu Yi smacked her lips and finally woke up a little. She raised her eyes. "Do you have water? I'm so sleepy." "Honey grapefruit tea. Here." "Thank you." Fu Yi drank half the bottle in one breath and finally woke up from her drowsiness. She became active again. "How about I treat you to a meal to celebrate? There's a restaurant nearby that has a good score. Let's find an internet cafe in the afternoon, and I'll bring you up. I'll make you blossom. Okay." Huaishir smiled. "It just so happens that I took the day off today." "Then it's settled." "Speaking of which, why are you in Jinling? I'll find you for a meal while I'm taking the exam. Anyway, I can get a discount if I use my dad's ID to buy tickets. If your dad finds out, he'll send me to the Special Affairs Department again." "So annoying. Why don't you stop eating?" "Eat. I'll eat. Huaishir followed behind her and watched her bouncing around. For some reason, he couldn't help but laugh. Even if it was different from what he had expected, wasn't his life now gradually filled with precious value? For a long time, the fear and uneasiness about the future that lingered in his heart finally dissipated and was replaced by a calmness that made him feel at ease. Whether he was an ascender or a normal person, now that the exam was over, he had thrown off a layer of burden from the past. Next, he was going to have a meal with his friends, and then he would go to the internet cafe to play games. At night, he would chat with her and share the joy that belonged to him. He would do this until Division Chief Fu called him from Xian High and scolded him for his wild ambition. His life at this moment was the daily life he yearned for, no matter the future. On the other side, the Social Security Bureau's action team returned to the car. When they counted the number of people, they were stunned. "Where's the original?" Emosen looked at the other confused people. "Did any of you see the original?" "I didn't see it." Everyone shook their heads in unison, and then their faces twitched. "Then where did the original go?" The original also didn't know where he was. After listening to Weischer's performance, he was in a daze and wandered the streets. When he came back to his senses, he didn't know where he was. His soul was in a daze, and he only felt that his heart was empty. When he felt his phone vibrate, he took it out. Before he could answer the phone, he saw his cousin's picture on the screen. His heart suddenly filled with sorrow. He didn't know why, but there was a kind of sadness that he lost something important that filled his chest and made his nose turn red. Why is this? With such a pretty boy face, why did he come to be an ascender? Why didn't he just play the piano and be a gigolo? Why did he come to steal my cousin? Young man, hey, young man, you've been standing for so long, don't hinder my business. Next to him, the stall owner who was making the keys looked up at him and asked seriously, "Are you worthy?" Yuan Zhao was stunned in place, as if he was struck by lightning. I'm not worthy." Once again, Yuan Zhao let out a wah and cried out unwillingly. Not only did he lose at the starting line, he suddenly realized that even if the starting line was the same, he still couldn't catch up to Weischer's speed. They were a match made in heaven. How could a monster like him object? Chapter 203. In the evening, the door of the cell slowly opened in front of the old man. The woman sleeping on the monotonous bed appeared to be in deep sleep. After hearing the sharp sound, she slowly opened her eyes. I practiced drumming. She saw her father and used steps for half an hour. The old man asked, "When I went to bed, I went to sleep for a long time." "Sounds good. The music is so good." Right. Luo Xian looked up and stared at the old man at the door. "There was no supper, are you here to no pick me beer, up, and Father? No points." Yesterday after lunch, the old man nodded slowly. He was picked up by the teacher. "Did you lose control again?" Led the team with a smile. "I saw the old lady also saying that there are discounted the 32 vegetables nearby from Division Chief. I bumped into it before she left. When I came out to buy vegetables, she patted his shoulder, telling him to pray apologetically for himself. I was careless and couldn't help it. But the overall result should be good. And she's ruining things. I seem to have done a good thing. Is it you or me who's ruining things?" Elder Luo nodded. "Go run to warm her up from the bed. Come back in 30 minutes. He patted the dust We're going on to her class. Shoulder. Elder then let's Luo go home. Tossed a towel. And a bottle of Luo protein powder nodded over. And he followed him at the muscular men who were out running. Didn't you come out for him to follow? Elder Luo seemed to have a meaningless muscle parade. He looked back at Luo Xian and saw that the basket she had just brought back studied the old man who was showing off his muscles and shorts. Although it's a bit wasteful, what are we going to learn today, right? With this mention, Luo Xian Weischer was looking down at the basket. "I know what you're thinking. If I had known, I'm too lazy to teach you. Buy more on the way back." Elder Luo raised his eyebrows. Elder Luo looked away and looked at him and walked in front. "You've learned you steps. What do you want to eat tonight? You've learned everything you should know." Elder Luo "You'll have to figure it out yourself," and shook his head. He paused and revealed a strange smile. "Let's change to something else. You have your own ways, right?" It was as if he had noticed sweet potatoes. After all, if there are chestnuts, Weischer's speed of improvement was really abnormal. That's it. It was expected that he would need 15 days to learn it. However, Luo Xian had mastered drumming and followed steps in 4 or 5 days. They left the vigilant although he didn't suspect through that layers of guards had and left the prison of the Social Security Bureau. There were many similar. They passed the last checkpoint. Although they were precious, give me a little more time. They weren't rare. Xiao Xian, he wasn't interested in learning about them. The old man, if he could learn them, and suddenly said softly that Huaishur was definitely
talented.
find someone who
He
can
didn't
kill
mind
you.
Huaishur learning
As they
more.
walked in silence,
He just hated those
his
people
face
who
could
didn't
not
have
have
the
the
talent.
She
but
did
still
not know
took up
if
a
that
spot
face still had a
every
trace
year.
of sadness.
For example,
or
a
if it
certain
was still
big cousin
calm
with an
as
innocent
iron.
face.
Okay, Dad.
Hearing that the old
Luo
man
Xian
wanted to
gently
hide
nodded
something,
and
Huaishur
smiled as she
suddenly
followed
became
behind
anxious.
her father.
His
Can't you
father's
teach
back
me
was
more?
still as broad
He said,
as
Are you
when he was
afraid
young.
that I'll learn how
He
to
was
beat
not
the
hunched
master?
or skinny.
Can you beat
When
me?
he walked in
Elder
front,
Luo
it was
sneered disdainfully,
as if he was about to
the
melt
more you
into the
teach,
sunset,
the more mistakes
melting in the light
you'll make.
The
No
next
matter how
day,
many
at the
routines
gym,
there are,
the old
in a
man
duel,
was still holding
you
the dumbbell
rely
in his
on the
hand.
changes of
He was busy
spiritual
training his
opportunity.
biceps while
This is what you're
Youngman
best at.
was singing.
It's best not
looking
to
at
fall
the
into the
dispirited
routines.
Huaishur
For
opposite
example,
him.
this
He sighed.
He suddenly
Looks
took
like
a
you
step
slept well.
forward and slammed
Huaishur
his
rolled
body.
his eyes,
His
revealing
burly
two
body
panda eyes.
moved forward.
I went to bed
3
at 10
feet without
o'clock
warning,
at night,
setting off
I
a
slept for
suffocating
8
hurricane.
hours. This
Before
was your
going to
steps.
bed, then
I played the
he
zither
seemed
for
to
half an
disappear in
hour.
place and appeared 10 steps behind him. This was also Yu's steps, but when he moved forward step by step, his slow speed actually compressed the air, setting off bursts of explosions, and the hurricane spread. Huaishur was stunned. This was still Yu's steps, the double Yu's steps, which seemed to be pacing with the rhythm of Yu's steps, formed such a terrifying effect. Then, as he moved forward, his hands slowly swung, cutting the hurricane, and the airwaves creating a vacuum in the air in a flash. Drumming. 2 fists collided. The vacuum collided with the vacuum, and thunder burst out. Double drumming. Then, it was a dazzling show that dazzled Huaishur. Half-step drumming, elbow drumming, body drumming. A simple move in the old man's hands was ever-changing, and the combination with Yu's steps was endless. The combination of the double U steps and the double drumming, after a punch, directly flipped Huaishur to the ground. Such a skill had already stepped into a realm that Huaishur could not imagine. It looks powerful, right? Elder Luo said calmly. In the end, there are only 2 moves. One is to take a step, and the other is to hit people. You've learned the basics, and the next step is up to you to figure it out. You can't rely on me to teach you everything. You have to learn it yourself. That was the truth, but Huaishur was still unwilling. What about Thunderbolt? If I teach you now, can you learn it? Elder Luo shook his head. You're still lacking. Don't think of yourself as a genius. Huaishur, you're just a faster learner and better at avoiding some wrong choices than others. But you're still far from being a genius. Old man, you're going too far. Huaishur was indignant. Isn't this considered a genius? TCH, Elder Luo did not even bother to refute him. He turned around and looked at Luo Xian, who was knitting at the side. Xiao Xian, show him what a genius is. Okay. The big sister stretched out her hand and pulled out a knitting needle. She held it lightly and aimed it at Huaishur's face from afar. She pushed it forward. Huaishur's hair stood on end. He instantly bounced back 12 meters, and his entire body was pressed against the wall. He could still feel that sharp, cold feeling pressing against his cheeks. It was as if there was a blade at his back. In a trance, a purple lightning flashed in the air. It was as straight as a pencil bursting forth from Luo Xian's hand. It was a wave of source form that had gathered into a bundle. It burst forth from the entanglement of 3 completely different forces, forming an unimaginable thunderbolt. The thunderbolt, which required the cooperation of the entire body's strength, was repeated on a knitting needle. It was flawless. Even if the origin form's waves were weaker than that of a second-stage ascended cultivator, like Huaishur, it was still a thunderbolt. If he was not careful, Huaishur even felt that he might be stabbed to death by that knitting needle. Immediately after, Luo Xian stuck the knitting needle into the ball of wool. She made a fist at Huaishur and slowly twisted her wrist. A sharp, ear-piercing sound burst forth. It was as if she had twisted an invisible gate. The air wailed and let out a shattering sound. Countless sharp sounds overlapped and shot out in all directions like sharp blades. This move had already exceeded Huaishir's expectations. He could not recognize it at all. Triple Thunderbolt. Elder Luo calmly explained. This move is called Heaven's Fall. She figured it out herself. If you want to learn it, go find her yourself. She won't hide it anyway. Forget it. Huaishir shook his head with a bitter smile. He wouldn't be able to learn it even if she taught him. Some things really depended on talent. But there was no doubt that in terms of skill, even if Huaishir's talent was 10 times greater, he would still be beaten by Luo Xian. Then what do we teach next? He raised his head and looked at the old man. I've only learned for 4 or 5 days. Don't tell me I'm going to have to study by myself next. Elder Luo reached out and took a spiked mace with sharp barbs from the shelf beside him. He waved it in his hand and smiled. Isn't the next part the part you're best at? It's also the part you're the most lacking and the weakest. He said, it's about how to use weapons. In the old man's opinion, even though Huaishir's soul ability was quite strange and had a wide range of applications, in terms of usage, it could be called trash. It seems like you have a lot of combat experience, but in reality, your basic skills are a mess. Your awareness and operation have both gone down the wrong path. As he spoke, he waved the heavy spiked mace in his hand, creating a wind that made Huaishir's heart jump. If you meet someone who's really good at it, you won't be able to withstand a single blow. Isn't it too much to say that? Huaishir was unhappy. Hey, I still have a lot of battle records. Is that so? Then, apart from the Theravada Tantric dual blade technique, which is unorthodox after removing the stigmata, the old style of the Inquisition's saber and sword technique, which doesn't match your height and physical strength at all, and the common Roman dagger combat, which part of it was polished by a teacher from the very beginning. Elder Luo looked at his face and asked. Huaishir was speechless. Indeed, the purpose of using weapons is to kill the enemy. In terms of being able to kill the enemy, your skills are up to standard. But don't you feel uncomfortable wearing other people's shoes all the time? If it was in the past, you wouldn't find it strange that several powerful countries would serve you, but now that drummer and you steps have reached the level of mastery. Let me guess, Elder Luo grinned and laughed gloatingly. With your own understanding, you must be starting to feel uncomfortable, right? Chapter 204. The muscular old man was right. It was as if he could see any flaw or problem in Huaishir. Even the slightest sense of inconsistency and discomfort in Huaishir could be easily detected. The current Huaishir was beginning to feel that it was difficult for him to use weapons with ease. The drawbacks pointed out by old Roland were not wrong in the slightest. After removing the Naga's stigmata, the Theravada Tantra's dual blade technique was nothing more than an ordinary technique. Without the underwater environment, the Naga's unique multiple arms, and the stigmata's assistance, it could only exert the most basic effect. It was not amazing. Van Helsing's old style of the tribunal's swordsmanship was profound, but this profoundness was based on Van Helsing himself. Van Helsing's own muscles, the unique speed of a vampire, and many years of experience combined to form this skill. When Huaishir copied it as it was, there would be mistakes. Compared to his vampire state, it was much worse. This was not a difference in strength and speed, but countless subtle details that were difficult to detect. The length of the arm, the length of the stride, the difference in height and weight were impossible to correct without 5 or 6 years of hard work. Although Roman dagger fighting was simple and straightforward, this kind of technique that was passed down in the army was based on the premise of rapid enhancement and the simplest way of teaching. There were many subtle changes that could not be taken into account. It was just right for the beginning, but there were no more subsequent techniques in the Red Glove's memory. This old man's eyesight was really sharp. However, rather than saying that this shocked him, it was more accurate to say that his own discovery had shocked him. Before this, Huaishur actually felt that Crow's worries were unnecessary. With the Book of Destiny in hand, a large number of records could be learned and used for reference. He could master it himself without a teacher. But now, he had a deeper level of understanding. The prototype of countless souls and the essence of countless records collected in the kingdom of heaven back, then could be said to have exhausted all the wisdom and experience in the world, but it could not create the results that the utopia really wanted. Instead, it caused the utopia to fall. Even if one could experience it thousands of times in the records, if one did not really practice it, they would not gain anything. Someone else's record was ultimately someone else's. It could be used as a reference, but if one couldn't figure out the main point and rely on it as the foundation, then they would unconsciously bury contradictions in the beginning. Looks like you finally figured it out. Elder Luo raised his eyebrows. I think I've figured it out, but what should I do? Huaishur sighed. To be honest, it has become a habit after such a long time. I can't just stop using it, can I? No, you're being stubborn again. Elder Luo shook his head. Isn't this the purpose of a teacher? What do you mean? Huaishur was puzzled. What I mean is, if you want to use it, then use it. Don't worry and use it boldly. It doesn't matter even if the original flaws remain. He stroked the barbs of the mace in his hand and grinned happily. And I will be responsible for destroying all of this, breaking all of your bad habits, and helping you start anew. Huaishur's face twitched. Was this a F***King fresh start or a new life? At the end of the day, you just want to bully noobs. Someone come quickly and drag this crazy old man away. But after thinking about it, it seemed that there was really no other way. All right. Huaishur took a deep breath and got up from the ground. Looking at the shiny mace in the old man's hand, he felt a chill at the root of his teeth. But there was no other way. He had chosen the class himself, and he had to finish it even if he cried. Besides, wasn't it just being bullied? He had long been used to it. Before we start, can we make a deal first? Huaishur summoned his saber and axe and asked cautiously, can we do it step by step? Sure. Elder Luo still had that evil grin on his face that made Huaishur uneasy. He stroked the old man's happy stick in his hand. The iron stick vibrated crazily under the drummer's strength and made a teeth-numbing sound. Don't worry. Even the lowest grade is enough to make you cry. Someone come quickly, there's a pervert here. Before he could run for his life and call for help, the muscular old man had already rushed over while waving his mace in the midst of Youngman's song. A nightmarish day began just like that. Who am I? Where am I? What the hell am I doing? Huaishur was paralyzed on the ground of the gym. He numbly raised his hand and smeared the silver liquid on the bloody hole on his arm. It was difficult to hide the bloody color on his body. Luo Xian was squatting next to him, bandaging the small wounds. She regretfully sighed as she applied the bandages. Father's moves are not light or heavy. If you want to practice, you can find me next time. Don't give me that. Huaishur wanted to cry, but had no tears. You father and daughter are the same. Elder Luo only liked to bully noobs at best, but you're different. You like to kill. Huaishur didn't want to accidentally overturn the boat. He still wanted to maintain a 100% winning rate between him and Luo Xian. Well, although he cheated, and he was one level higher than her. But a win was a win. He couldn't give her a chance to turn the tables. At this moment, Huaishur's upper body and limbs were almost covered with a thin layer of silver. That was the iron scar formed by the excessive amount of silver blood potion that couldn't be absorbed by the flesh for the time being. Later, when Huaishur recovered a little, he would forcibly tear it open and apply a new layer. He opened the card and saw the handwriting on it. Dear Mr. Huaisher, we have recently received your application for the competition. Our team feels greatly honored to have a legendary investigator, a rare calamity musician, and a trainee culinary demon here. We have rushed to complete the procedures for you. We sincerely hope that you can achieve good results in this year's Asian Rookie Competition. Tomorrow News Competition Organizing Committee. What the F*CK is a calamity musician. Huaisher stood rooted to the ground, dumbfounded. The news has spread all over the world so quickly. You actually became a calamity musician? Luo Xian, next to him, was surprised. I heard that this certificate is very difficult to get. There are only 100 people in the world, but with the intelligence channels of Tomorrow News, it is not difficult to find out. Huaisher's expression twitched. He looked down at the iron card in his hand. What about this? What is this? The participation certificate for the main competition, Luo Xian said. We can directly help you skip the preliminary part, and you can participate in the main competition. Generally, only third-order ascendants can get such a certificate, but for a legendary investigator, it can only be said to be ordinary treatment. Sister, can you not mention that? Huaisher wanted to cry, but had no tears. He had inexplicably become a legendary investigator, inexplicably become a trainee cooking demon, and then inexplicably become a calamity musician. He had not leveled up much, but he was about to go through all of hell's tests. No matter how he looked at it, he felt like a fat sheep. Killing one would make him famous and give him an EXP bag. Don't worry, the average person can't kill you now. Luo Xian comforted him. If they want to kill you, they have to at least be as skilled as me, right? At this time, the courier came back. Oh, right, I almost forgot. He looked up and said, there is also a courier sent by Jinling's cousin to Ms. Luo Xian. As he spoke, he took out a folder from his pocket that was exactly the same as the one in Huaisher's hand. At that moment, Huaisher felt the strong malice of the world towards him. Chapter 205. Late at night, Luo Xian knocked on the old man's door. Come in. The door is not locked. In the empty room, there was only a bed, a table, and a chair. It was so empty. It was like a cage. The old man sat by the bed and looked at the hanging scroll on the wall quietly, but there was nothing on the hanging scroll. There was only a blank page on the paper. He was engrossed in it. What's the matter? Luo Xian put an iron plate on the table. Cousin gave it to me. The old man was silent for a moment and asked, Do you want to go? Luo Xian thought for a moment and asked, Will it be troublesome if I lose control? If you want to go, then go. The old man retracted his gaze and stared at his only daughter. You're already an adult. As a father, I can't be by your side forever. Luo Xian was stunned for a moment and couldn't help but laugh. She reached out and tucked her hair behind her ear. Father, do you have any instructions? If you want to say something, I hope you can be happy. The old man pondered for a moment and looked at her expectantly. Will you be happy? Father, will you be happy? Luo Xian asked. Elder Luo shook his head. I don't know. Then I don't know either. Luo Xian got up and picked up the iron plate from the table. She thought for a moment and said seriously, maybe there aren't many things in this world that can make people happy. Then go. The old man leaned against the wall and closed his eyes as if he was sleepy. There are so many things in this world. How will you know if you don't try? The door closed. In the silence, a gentle wind came from outside the window. The hanging scroll on the wall moved slightly, and the blank space seemed to ripple like water. Name. Why? Sure. Age. It seems to be 17. Gender. Male. How many is this? I can't see clearly. So, in a trance, Huaisher saw the big sister in front of him nod in satisfaction. He got up and turned to the old man behind him. It's just a concussion. We can continue. Then let's continue. Huaisher leaped up from the ground like a carp and landed flat on the floor. Bang! Huaisher staggered and struggled. Help me up, I can still send. How about we call it a day? Elder Luo couldn't continue torturing the noob anymore. He lowered his head and looked at Huaisher, who was almost turned into a sieve on the ground. Are you one of those legendary perverts who will feel good after being beaten up? F*CKU. You'll feel great when I beat you up like this. Looks like he's in good condition. The old man nodded and waved the mace in his hand, creating a sound that pierced through the air. You can still continue. Get up, young man. Grandpa Little Sunflower's class has started. Don't, I was wrong. Huaisher cupped his hands and begged for mercy. Let me catch my breath. 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. Tisk, 5 minutes is too long. How about 3 minutes? 3 minutes is enough for me to die, let alone gasping for breath. The bare-chested old man picked up his mace and returned to his chair. He picked up his iced protein powder and cold-brewed tea, wondering how it would taste. Huaisher was turned over from the ground by Luo Xian. She applied ointment, flipped him over skillfully, and applied ointment again. It was like adding seasoning to a pickled fish. After a layer of salt, she sprinkled another layer of salt. In the end, a salted fish was done. He struggled to prop himself up from the ground and stared at the old man not far away. His eyes were fierce. He couldn't help but be fierce. Anyone who was beaten up by an old bastard until they were about to enter the ICU would be fierce. Moreover, he couldn't beat him, so he could only stare at him to vent his anger. Not happy, Elder Luo grinned and hooked his finger at him. Come and beat me? When I get my Gatling gun and shoot out blue flames, you'll be dead. Huaisher could only talk now. In the past 3 days, he had been completely beaten down. The muscular old man in front of him had destroyed all the methods related to the use of weapons inch by inch, and then tried to rebuild them. It wasn't a pure torture, but a merciless correction. He used what could be described as appropriate strength and kept a sense of propriety to brutally and cruelly defeat Huaisher. If there was any mistake in his posture or action, he would be mercilessly punished. If not for this, he suspected that he wouldn't even know how to hold a knife now. This old baldy was definitely using his power to avenge a personal grudge. He hated that he had such long hair, gasping for breath. Huaisher applied a silver blood potion to the wound on his arm. He got up from the ground again and took out a knife and an axe. Come, this ability is really convenient. Elder Luo pinched his chin and looked at Huaisher. Kid, don't tell me you have a professional alchemist license. It was still early. He hadn't taken the test yet. Huaisher thought of this and realized that he seemed to have unknowingly wanted to take the test for all the licenses in the world. Looking at himself now, he was a registered member of the Astronomy Association, a level 1 border hunter, a legendary investigator, a trainee cooking demon, and a calamity musician. Even after becoming an ascender, he still had to take the test for all the licenses. It was too sad. While he was in a daze, an old face with a sinister smile suddenly appeared in front of him. Hey, what are you thinking? In Elder Luo's hand, the mace swept down and went straight for his head. It was a bash. Without thinking at all, Huaisher raised his knife to block the mace. He moved forward and raised his other hand, the axe in his other hand fiercely chopping at the old man's bald ladle. This time, he took the initiative. There was an ear-piercing screech as the old man pulled back his stick. With the burst of a loud noise, the iron mace suddenly turned soft. It drew a dexterous arc in the air and bypassed Luo Xian's dagger to hit her throat. Luo Xian still stood in the same place without moving. She just shook her arm and stabbed the dagger downward. She used attack to attack and cut her father's 5 fingers. In an instant, Elder Luo let go. In the air, he casually patted the handle. The iron mace shook violently and changed its center of gravity. It spun in the air and flew past Luo Xian's cheek as Luo Xian leaned back. It fell into the old man's other hand. Light changes. The heavy iron mace in the old man's hand seemed to have become a pole. He waved it casually and dazzled people. His strength was sometimes light and sometimes heavy. The speed was so fast that it was shocking. As the target of the attack, Luo Xian only used one move from the beginning to the end. She used the same move to deal with all kinds of changes. She blocked the seemingly thunderous and ever-changing mace outside the door. Although it was mostly a demonstration, it could be seen that the two of them did not hold back at all. Even if they deliberately slowed down their speed, the vicious intention of the changes in their skills still did not change. It was never gentle. Instead, it was like a life and death battle. In a trance, Huaisher seemed to understand a little bit of what a change was, but it was difficult to describe. It was like encountering a question that he seemed to have seen before, but did not know how to do it at all. He seemed to understand, but not understand. This was equivalent to not understanding at all. He had encountered this kind of illusion several times over the past few days, but every time he tried it with full confidence, he only got a crushing defeat. It was like everyone could talk about great principles, but only a few could really do it. The high-intensity, fierce battle had exhausted Huaisher mentally and physically. Once he relaxed at this moment, he began to feel drowsy. He could not stop yawning, and his eyelids unconsciously drooped down. He could only vaguely hear the sound of air breaking and steel colliding. It was not until Elder Luo unhappily swept the mace over and was blocked by the sacrificial knife in Huaisher's hand that Huaisher woke up from his dream. His expression changed. He was stunned and puzzled as if he had seen a ghost. Elder Luo frowned. He did not understand what he was doing. Huaisher raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Old man, your move just now was 44 strokes. That you're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.